The Xinzhou Free Alliance University of Science and Technology. Lush green canopies stretched one after another interspersed with the surrounding rows of buildings, making this renowned university look like a small city within a rainforest. In the Xu building, the spacious office was somewhat noisy. The sounds of questions and answers between teachers and students mingled with the clatter of keyboards filling the entire room. Just then an image appeared on the projector at the front of the office. A clear female voice rang out. Breaking news: the Alliance's first aircraft carrier has been delayed in its launch. The specific date is yet to be determined. In the image, a delicate-looking female reporter gazed seriously at the camera with a calm sea in the background. Almost instantly, the atmosphere in the office fell silent. Teachers and students alike craned their necks to look at the projector at the front. 100 years ago, when the national gates of Xinzhou were forcibly blasted open by the naval guns of the ocean, the people who had lived on this ancient land for centuries gained a new understanding of the word power. So today, even an ordinary citizen of Xinzhou eagerly awaited the launch of the Alliance's first aircraft carrier. But the news at hand was a blow to these hopeful people. Just as the atmosphere in the office grew increasingly heavy, the sound of a chair scraping broke the silence. Everyone instinctively looked toward the source. Their expressions varied. The person at the center of everyone's attention was a young man who was now carrying a thick stack of documents and walking out. Clearly, judging by the reaction of the crowd, this young man was no ordinary figure. Indeed, a year ago, he had been the star of the University of Science and Technology of the Alliance. Xu Renju was the first student in the history of the Alliance National Defense University of Science and Technology to be admitted with a perfect score, the first to be granted permission to skip grades, and also the youngest graduate of the undergraduate program and the youngest master's graduate. After graduation, he joined the top Military Research Institute at just over 20 years old. That institute was precisely the one currently developing the Xinzhou Free Alliance's first aircraft carrier. In other words, he had once been involved in the development of the carrier that was now being reported on television. At that time, some even speculated that perhaps the youngest director of a military research institute in the Xinzhou Free Alliance might be born within a decade. With all these titles, it was no exaggeration to call him a favored child of heaven. But unexpectedly, less than 2 months after joining the institute, he was dismissed on the grounds that his ideas were too radical and unsuitable for research, and was sent back to the University of Science and Technology of the Alliance to become a teacher. During his time as a teacher, Xu Renju began to frequently take leave and neglect his duties. In the eyes of others, this was undoubtedly a sign that he couldn't accept such a huge drop and was giving up on himself. Many people thought he might not even pass the teacher evaluation in the second half of the year and might even lose his position as a teacher. The clear sound of a door closing interrupted everyone's thoughts. As the figure disappeared, the look of regret on the faces of many teachers gradually faded. On the campus of the Alliance University of Science and Technology, Xu Renju walked slowly along the shaded path, not paying attention to the picturesque scenery around him, his mind constantly deducing complex formulas and data. When he unconsciously returned to the faculty dormitory, Xu Renju came to his senses. Recalling the news just now, he shook his head slightly and muttered, "Time is running out. Must speed up the progress." Xu Renju murmured softly, then quickly walked towards the dormitory. In fact, he had anticipated the delay of the aircraft carrier's launch. Having worked at the institute, he naturally knew some of the design plans for the carrier. Since this was the Alliance's first carrier, the development team had adopted a conservative approach from the outset, overlooking many seemingly minor but critical factors. Especially in terms of power, the design team's original intention was to have the steam turbine output only enough power to meet the minimum speed requirement of the carrier. After all, this was the Alliance's first aircraft carrier. Everything should be stable and improvements could be made later when the technology matured. But the complex structure of the power system, especially the interconnections between the steam turbines, meant that any small part could cause an ineffective output of power. So he judged that the Alliance's carrier would ultimately encounter a power shortage problem. And the delay in the launch came even sooner than he had expected. After being dismissed from the institute, he was initially somewhat unable to accept it, but soon adapted. Because he had a secret unknown to others, when Xu Renju was a child, a mysterious intelligence system called Zero System had inexplicably appeared in his mind. This Zero System acted like a flexible second brain, greatly enhancing his thinking ability. Therefore, after returning, Xu Renju never gave up his research, and the frequent leaves were for this reason. Single turbine. Almost there. Back in the dormitory, looking at the towering piles of documents and data, a dying face emerged in Xu Renju's memory, and his eyes grew increasingly determined. Xinzhou Free Alliance, an unknown military port. A large ship built from scratch lay quietly in the dock, awaiting the day it would set sail. In the distance, the Naval Engineering Research Institute. Compared to the bustling atmosphere of the previous days, the atmosphere inside the institute had become somewhat gloomy over the past 2 days. In a confidential meeting room, the heads of various modules of the carrier development team were gathered together, but each one had their heads bowed, their spirits low, and the atmosphere in the meeting room was extremely heavy. The Alliance's development of the aircraft carrier had been ongoing for more than 10 years from the initial stage, and the Alliance's vision for the carrier had existed for decades. It is said that 10 years sharpen a sword, but the Alliance had prepared for this sword for nearly half a century, consuming nearly 2 generations. Yet the failure of the past few days hit everyone in the room like a heavy blow. If carelessness led to the loss of decades of waiting and the efforts of 2 generations, no one in the room could bear the responsibility. Fortunately, the oppressive atmosphere did not last long. With a light cough, the old man sitting at the head of the table slowly asked, "Ladies and gentlemen, the journey continues. Let us not be discouraged." He paused mid-sentence, his gaze sweeping over the heads in the room. Under this sharp gaze, everyone present felt their hearts tighten. The old man was Deng Yanxian, the chief designer of the carrier design team, and also the most authoritative authority in the field of shipbuilding within the Alliance. According to the assessment just sent to me by the technical team, the cause of the launch failure is incompatibility between the various systems of the carrier. However, these can still be resolved. The biggest problem is in the power system. There are 2 main problems with the power system. First, the output power of the 4 steam turbines is far less than the output power in the original design. Second, the output power of the 4 steam turbines cannot be consistent. The power is uneven, and the control system cannot precisely control the energy output. So, the root cause is still in the power system. Seeing this, Deng Yanxian turned his gaze to the middle-aged man on his lower left, who was the head of the power system, Xing Hongjun. "Engineer Xing, does the department have a solution to the power problem?" Feeling the pressure of everyone's gaze, Xing Hongjun's scalp tingled. After a long while, he spoke with difficulty. "Chief Designer Deng, there is only one set of power design plans initially. We can only slowly explore and improve." Hearing this, Deng Yanxian's brow instinctively furrowed, but he did not mean to blame Xing Hongjun. In fact, everyone on the development team knew that the coupled steam turbine had always been a weakness of the Alliance's carrier. Other systems could be referenced from large ships, but the coupled steam turbine was a real piece of hardware. Ordinary large ships only used single steam turbines. The coupled steam turbine was a technology unique to aircraft carriers. In other words, for the Alliance, the coupled steam turbine was a complete from-scratch process. The difficulty was unimaginable, and in this regard, Deng Yanxian could not blame Xing Hongjun. This was not his fault, it was a weakness of the entire Alliance. As things stood, Deng Yanxian could only withdraw his gaze from Xing Hongjun and then look at the others. "In that case, let's pool our wisdom. Does anyone have suggestions regarding the power system? Feel free to speak your minds." After his words, the heads looked at each other, but no one spoke. After all, who would dare to randomly suggest ideas for a technology that was being started from scratch? Finally, after a long silence, a hand slowly rose from the back of the conference room. The owner of the hand was a young woman with a delicate face that showed a hint of competence. Normally, such a young face would never be seen at a meeting of this level of responsibility. But strangely, everyone present seemed accustomed to her presence. There was a reason she was the head of the technical team that Deng Yanxian had mentioned earlier. Having become the head of the technical team at just over 20 years old through her own efforts, her resume was impressive. Even the previous Xu Renju might not have matched her in terms of resume. "Xinghuan, tell us your thoughts." Deng Yanxian did not underestimate her because of her youth and spoke. "Chief Designer Deng, when I was organizing the documents earlier, I found a document that mentioned a single turbine power system design." Ruan Xinghuan pushed up her glasses on the bridge of her nose, her tone unhurried. As the words fell, the vast meeting room seemed to fall silent for a brief moment. After the silence, most of the insiders present looked at Ruan Xinghuan, who was seated at the very back, with strange expressions. Clearly, they were already aware of the document about the so-called single turbine mode that Ruan Xinghuan had just mentioned, because this so-called single turbine mode was a proposal put forward by an arrogant intern in the Research Institute, and it had caused quite a stir of ridicule for a while. "Oh, tell me more." Deng Yanxian, who was clearly unaware of this, looked at Ruan Xinghuan with mild curiosity. But before Ruan Xinghuan could speak, Xing Hongjun couldn't help but interject. "Ahem, Chief Engineer Deng, I have also heard of the document that Team Leader Ruan mentioned." However, as he spoke, Xing Hongjun's face showed a hint of difficulty. "What's wrong?" Deng Yanxian frowned. "While that document was proposed by an intern in our department earlier, it had no logical basis, let alone data support, so." Xing Hongjun recounted what he knew, causing Deng Yanxian's frown to deepen. As Xing Hongjun's words fell, many heads in the room nodded in agreement. "Chief Engineer Deng, that document has no theoretical foundation, it's not credible. Moreover, the single turbine mode is only used on cargo ships. It's absolutely impossible on an aircraft carrier." Deng Yanxian thought for a moment, then suddenly raised his head and asked, "Where is that intern now?" At the time, the department held a meeting and decided his ideas were too radical, so he was sent back to school. Xing Hongjun informed Deng Yanxian of the outcome. Unexpectedly, Deng Yanxian's heart stirred upon hearing it, as if he had thought of something, his expression turning complex. Finally, he muttered in a voice no one else could hear. Ideas too radical. After a long pause, Deng Yanxian came back to himself and directly turned his gaze back to Ruan Qinghuan. Qinghuan, what are your thoughts? Ruan Qinghuan had remained silent while others were speaking, just watching quietly. Only when Deng Yanxian's gaze fell on her did Ruan Qinghuan speak, though her eyes were fixed on the others cold. Before answering the chief engineer's question, I would like to ask everyone present, have any of you actually read the entire document thoroughly? As the words fell, most people in the room looked at each other in confusion. To be honest, most of them had only heard of it. Who had actually read such an obviously amateurish thesis? Under the heavy silence, it was Xing Hongjun who finally spoke. Team Leader 1, I understand your point. I have read that thesis, and I admit the idea is indeed quite creative. I know that the so-called single turbine mode is not a pure single turbine, but rather integrates 4 turbines to output the power of 4 turbines in a single turbine mode. However, at this point Xing Hongjun paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, his tone turning serious. But we are not here to discuss creativity. In scientific research, practice yields true knowledge. 20 years ago, I would have considered it a good proposal, even worth investing in research. But today it can only be considered a good idea. At the end, Xing Hongjun said each word deliberately, his eyes meeting Ruan Qinghuan's directly. What we need now is a method to solve the problem, not a creative idea that starts from scratch. As the words fell, the expressions of the attendees shifted. Indeed, what they needed now was not a vague idea, but even if the single turbine mode was a great idea, so what? Could they scrap the existing power system and start over? Not to mention whether there was enough time, could the single turbine mode even be guaranteed to succeed? It had to be said that although team leader Ruan was knowledgeable, she was still too young. Subconsciously, everyone looked at Ruan Qinghuan, sighing inwardly. Just as the atmosphere in the meeting room became a little strange, Ruan Qinghuan's voice came again. Her eyes were calm as she looked at Xing Hongjun, her tone devoid of emotion. So, is this the capital of your arrogance? As the words fell, a tense atmosphere of hostility spread through the room. Many attendees looked at Ruan Qinghuan in surprise. Even though they had all heard of Ruan Qinghuan's outspoken nature, they were still taken aback by her attitude. What was wrong with her today? To clash with the chief engineer of the power system over a dismissed intern's empty proposal. Everyone knew Ruan Qinghuan's future was limitless, but that was still in the future. In the Alliance's scientific research circle, seniority was paramount. Ruan Qinghuan was far inferior to Xing Hongjun in both qualifications and position, and her current action was nothing less than offending an elder. If this got out, it would be a significant blow to her reputation. At this moment, Xing Hongjun, feeling slighted by a junior, also lost face and snorted lightly. Then does team leader Ruan have any other unique insights? Unexpectedly, Ruan Qinghuan did not answer him, but instead looked at Deng Yanxian, who was seated at the head. Chief engineer, after discovering that proposal, I derived some related formulas and data myself. Please take a look. As she spoke, Ruan Qinghuan stood up, picked up a stack of documents, and walked towards Deng Yanxian. Deng Yanxian took the documents, glanced at Ruan Qinghuan, and then began to read them carefully. Unexpectedly, as he read, his eyelids twitched, and his gaze was immediately drawn to the first few words. The mechanical connection of the prime mover and propeller forms an independent propulsion unit. Gas turbine drive structure diagram. Immediately after, Deng Yanxian's heartbeat inevitably quickened. He finally understood why everyone else said this proposal was too radical. Strictly speaking, this was no longer a simple idea. It was essentially a complete redesign of the entire power structure of the aircraft carrier. With the data Ruan Qinghuan had derived, Deng Yanxian's preliminary judgment was that this proposal was completely feasible. It could be said that the designer of this proposal was either a madman or a genius. Wait. Suddenly, Deng Yanxian's expression changed dramatically, and his breathing became inexplicable. Deng Yanxian suddenly realized the question: when the dismissed intern first proposed this plan, did he already know that the carrier's power system had problems? If the intern had foreseen this, doesn't that mean the entire RD team was less visionary than an intern? Hiss. For some reason, Deng Yanxian dared not think further. He vaguely felt that he had inexplicably missed something. If this proposal had been available 10 years ago. Unfortunately now. At the same time, Deng Yanxian's series of facial expressions were observed by everyone in the room. This made everyone in the meeting room curious, craning their necks to see. Even Xing Hongjun, who had been ignored earlier, kept glancing sideways, doubt creeping into his heart. Could it be that he had missed something back then? But he also knew that given the current situation, Deng Yanxian would not support a plan without detailed planning. For the aircraft carrier to be launched on schedule, it had to be improved on the original basis. The Alliance did not have the time or resources to develop a new plan. So he said with full confidence, his eyes inadvertently glancing back. Chief Engineer Deng, the Power Department is currently conducting a thorough inspection. I believe the results will be available soon. Please give us your instructions for the next steps. As the words fell, all eyes focused on Deng Yanxian, waiting for his signal. After a long moment, Deng Yanxian held the documents, took a deep breath, then, after each department identifies the cause, come up with a response plan as soon as possible, especially the power department. In the end, Deng Yanxian chose to compromise. As the chief designer of the aircraft carrier, he opted for a steady and secure approach. The Alliance's first aircraft carrier could no longer withstand any turbulence. As the words fell, most people in the room breathed a sigh of relief, evidently sharing the same sentiment. Only Ruan Qinghuan, though she said nothing, could not hide the disappointment in her eyes. Ruan Qinghuan was not blindly confident in the single turbine mode proposal. She had only become convinced after deriving and verifying it. Moreover, she did not know the dismissed in turn. Everything she did came from her own heart. All right, the meeting is. Qinghuan, stay for a moment. As the crowd filed out, only Ruan Qinghuan and Deng Yanxian remained in the large meeting room. Teacher. Ruan Qinghuan bowed her head, her spirits low. In fact, besides being the team leader of the technical group, Ruan Qinghuan was also Deng Yanxian's student. However, not many people knew about this relationship. Qinghuan, your teacher understands your thoughts, but at present, we and even the entire Alliance can only choose to play it safe. Over the past 100 years, the Alliance has lost too much. We have lost too much. Now we can no longer afford to lose. Deng Yanxian looked at his prized student, his eyes carrying a hint of gravity. Teacher, I understand. Feeling the weight of her teacher's words, Ruan Qinghuan's expression became serious, and she nodded. But I know you are not reconciled, and neither is your teacher. So, Deng Yanxian changed his tone and said, go ahead and give it a try. Hearing this, Ruan Qinghuan's eyes lit up. Teacher, do you mean? Deng Yanxian did not answer, just nodded. I understand. He'll go now. Seeing this, Ruan Qinghuan quickly reacted. As she spoke, she walked towards the door, flipping through the documents she had retrieved from Deng Yanxian. With a mix of emotions in her eyes, she murmured softly. Alliance University of Science and Technology. Xu Renju. Lianming University of Science and Technology, the vast campus shaded by green trees. It was noon, and the bustling crowd filled the main thoroughfare. At the foot of the faculty dormitory building, two elderly men were walking unsteadily inside the apartment. They had just met. The one wearing reading glasses was called Zhang Chonglin, and the one leaning on a cane was called Li Mandi. Coincidentally, both had been entrusted by the Naval Research Institute to find someone, and it was the same person. However, the difference was that Zhang Chonglin had learned the news first. Initially, he asked students to search, but failed, so he later decided to come personally. Li Mandi, upon hearing the news, immediately came in person. After some exchanges, they happened to meet and decide. Along the way, the two old professors kept chatting. I wonder why the institute is looking for Teacher Xu. Could it be related to the delay in launching the aircraft carrier? No, Teacher Xu hasn't been there long. Even if they wanted a scapegoat, they wouldn't go this far. He shouldn't have gone in the first place. Was the first aircraft carrier so easy to develop? What a pity to waste such a promising talent. I heard that after Teacher Xu returned, he has been wallowing in self-abandonment. Truly a pity. In the end, their tone was full of emotion. They both sympathized deeply with Xu Renju's plight. By the way, how is your plan for the gas turbine system of the Navy's destroyers coming along? Walking in the shade, Li Mandi, leaning on his cane, was moved and asked casually. The two were not only professors at Lianming University of Science and Technology, but also special consultants to the Naval Equipment Research Institute. Their expertise was all in marine power. Upon hearing this, Zhang Chonglin lowered his head and sighed, a trace of fatigue in his eyes. I don't even mention it. None of the several plans I've made have a thermal efficiency over 30. It's enough for civilian use, but for military. Alas. As his words fell, Li Mandi was silent for a moment, then also sighed deeply and shook his head. If Zhang Chonglin was like this, how could he be any better? For years, all engines used by the Lianming Navy fleet had been imported from abroad. The only aircraft carrier using domestic engines was still far from launch. Lianming scholars had been continuously developing domestic engines, but unfortunately technological breakthroughs could not be achieved in a short time. This was the powerless and desperate truth. And as scholars themselves, they were among those who felt the deepest powerlessness and despair. After a long silence, the two arrived at their destination. With a clear ding-dong sound, the elevator doors opened, and the two old professors with different expressions walked out. Zhang Chonglin looked at the room number beside him and muttered, 301, that's right, it's here. Huh, the door is not closed. Zhang Chonglin was about to knock, but as soon as his hand touched the door, it opened by itself. Seeing this, the two did not hesitate, and slowly pushed the door open and entered. But once inside, what they saw made them both freeze in unison. What is this? Looking at the white expanse before them, they were suspicious. Upon closer inspection, these white things turned out to be documents. The few pieces of furniture in the room were all covered with documents and books, and even the floor was piled with bundles of documents. At first glance, it seemed as if they had entered a world of books. This? Zhang Chonglin stood stunned, extremely amazed at the scene before him. If not for the room number outside, he would have thought he had gone to the wrong place. Li Mandi reacted, first frowning as he stepped past Zhang Chonglin and randomly picked up a stack of documents to read. At this time, Zhang Chonglin also came to his senses, seemingly still unable to believe it, and looked around the apartment again. It was no different from his own apartment, with even fewer furnishings, as if the space was deliberately left for storing documents. But so many documents. As his thoughts wandered, an exclamation interrupted Zhang Chonglin's thinking. How? 40. Following the sound, Zhang Chonglin realized that Li Mandi had somehow passed him, holding a stack of documents with an expression like he had seen a ghost. Out of curiosity, Zhang Chonglin quickly leaned in, momentarily forgetting that this was someone else's apartment. This is gas turbine blueprints. Inside the apartment, the cool breeze from the window was refreshing, but Li Mandi's heart was burning with excitement. Axial flow compressor and gas turbine individually combined multi-cycle scheme. After derivation and verification, the final thermal efficiency can reach over 40. Li Mandi's hands trembled slightly as he murmured under his breath, gazing fervently at the blueprints before him. Clearly, the blueprints in his hands had brought him an extraordinary shock. A gas turbine with a thermal efficiency of 40 could be considered, if not top tier, at least first class. After all Lianming scholars were still striving to overcome the 30 barrier. In this small apartment, blueprints for 40 thermal efficiency had appeared. If these blueprints were genuine, then in the future the Shenzhou Free Alliance would no longer have to rely on anyone else, and could establish its own maritime system. How could Li Mandi not be excited thinking of this? At this moment, Zhang Chonglin beside him was also looking seriously at the blueprints in Li Mandi's hands, his eyes flickering slightly, clearly not calm inside. However, compared to Li Mandi, Zhang Chonglin calmed down first. As a research scholar, rigor was a necessary quality. Oldly don't jump to conclusions. Zhang Chonglin definitely needed to remind Li Mandi. Upon hearing this, Li Mandi seemed to suddenly realize something, and his expression gradually calmed. But upon closer look, that trace of fervor in his eyes could not be shaken off. At this moment, he also realized that all these wonderful visions were based on one premise: the blueprints were correct. Thinking of this, Li Mandi's heart grew hot again. Especially after looking around and seeing the thick stacks of documents, his fervor intensified. Then Zhang Chonglin obviously also realized it, and after exchanging a glance with Li Mandi, they nodded simultaneously. At this moment, how could they care about anything else? Not only had they long forgotten that they were still in someone else's apartment, but they had also abandoned their original purpose of finding someone. Under the temptation of the blueprints, everything else was thrown to the winds. Next, the old friends worked in perfect unison, simultaneously pulling out the pins clipped to their shirts and meticulously checking the blueprints along with the formulas and data marked on them, calculating with great care. If the data was correct, then the authenticity of these blueprints would be very high. Alliance University of Science and Technology Faculty, Housing Building 10. As dusk fell from morning onward, Li Mandi and Zhang Chonglin had been tirelessly verifying calculations for nearly a day, the rustling sounds in the room persisting from daylight into the night. Such a heavy computational load was extremely mentally draining. An ordinary person would have long collapsed from exhaustion, but the two before him seemed tireless and even appeared to be growing more excited. It's done, it's done. After an unknown amount of time, the rustling in the room finally ceased, but it was followed by a somewhat dazed cry. Looking at the final result, Zhang Chonglin and Li Mandi's excitement was beyond words. 42. The final result of their calculations showed a thermal efficiency of 42%. The Alliance's first independently developed gas turbine with a thermal efficiency exceeding 30%, the hope for the rise of the Alliance fleet, was in their hands. At that moment, the overly excited Li Mandi caught a glimpse out of the corner of his eye. The next instant, as if seeing something unimaginable, Li Mandi's body stiffened abruptly. What's wrong? Oldly. Seeing Li Mandi's strange behavior, Zhang Chonglin curiously followed his gaze. Thighs. This. Li Mandi tried to speak, but found his throat blocked, unable to utter a word. Seeing this, Zhang Chonglin had no choice but to follow Li Mandi's gaze. The next moment, he too seemed to be struck by lightning, his eyes slightly widening. Because in their field of vision, another document lay quietly. In the limited view, the end of that document clearly bore a few small distinct characters. Thermal efficiency ratio 50. In an instant, the two rushed over and briefly scanned it. Zhang Chonglin and Li Mandi exchanged a glance, then carefully examined the other documents in the apartment. Suddenly, a blazing light burst in their eyes. Could it be? The two felt their hearts nearly leaping out of their chests with excitement. Vaguely, they felt as if they were immersed in an ocean of truth. In the following hours, the two moved tirelessly from corner to corner of the apartment, happily browsing through it all. Gas turbines, steam turbines. Thermal efficiency 43. Thermal efficiency 46. Thermal efficiency 50. After seeing dozens of blueprints for steam turbines and gas turbines, their worldview collapsed, or rather they became numb. Such a massive workload. It was as if a liver had grown a human. After checking everything thoroughly as scholars, a sharp consensus arose in their hearts. Perhaps the alliance was about to change. If all the blueprints in the room were real, the alliance would no longer be constrained by others in marine engines, and even the possibility of surpassing them in technology was not out of the question. This was a landmark achievement for the entire Xinzhou Free Alliance. On this foundation, the alliance's marine sector would flourish with 100 flowers blooming. Because many solutions that countless experts and scholars in the alliance had sought in vain were everywhere here. They even found a plan with a thermal efficiency of 40 in the trash bin. After seeing this plan, the two were silent for a long time, their emotions complicated. The level that tens of thousands of alliance scholars had hoped to break through was casually thrown into the trash bin. For a moment, they didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Dare ask if there was anything more wasteful in the world. Who the hell is this kid? After a long while, Mandy calmed down a bit and said with difficulty. Just now they had been thinking that based on the first blueprint, the alliance might be able to establish its own marine system in the future. But now it seemed that the sheer completeness of the materials in this room was enough to build a complete system. This kid has walked the path for all of us. The young people nowadays. Too terrifying. Hearing this, Zhang Chenglin's throat was dry, his mind in a daze, and he said with a wry, to put it bluntly, the materials in this room, if taken out, would be enough to sustain the majority of scholars in the marine. Thinking that what he had studied for half a lifetime was inferior to a young man in his early 20s, Zhang Chonglin didn't know whether to cry or laugh. But the problem wasn't he said to have given up after being dismissed? What the hell was going on? Looking at the mountain of documents piled up in the apartment, Zhang Chenglin's mood was very complicated. If possible, he would also love to have a dozen of such self-abandonment. He didn't understand why the Research Institute had dismissed such a genius. No. If they could see that Xu Renju was a genius, how could the Research Institute fail to see it? You know that Research Institute gathered talents from all relevant fields of the alliance. Could it be? Suddenly Zhang Chonglin understood and looked at Li Mandy with a meaningful expression. The institute is really cautious. Hearing this, Li Mandy was stunned, then stroked his white beard and revealed a knowing smile. So that's it, but it's understandable. Classified projects require confidentiality. Obviously, the two had once again reached the same conclusion in tacit understanding. The institute couldn't have missed such a genius. So the dismissal was probably a facade. Dismissed, using the lame excuse of radical ideas unsuitable for research. There must be something fishy. If such a genius is unsuitable for research, then might as well say all the research scholars in the alliance are you. It might be a plausible excuse, but with the reality before them, only a fool would dismiss such a genius. Those old sly foxes at the institute are really cunning. They even deceive their own people. Just as the two felt they had seen through the truth, the bedroom door which they had ignored made a clear sound. Then a handsome face, somewhat haggard, appeared before them. The three faced each other, and the atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Xu Renju was startled by the two, then stared blankly at the uninvited guests in his apartment, his mind momentarily unable to process. 3 days ago, the single turbine design had entered its final simulation phase. Due to time constraints, Xu Renju, combining the zero unit in his mind, had recalculated all the formulas and data from scratch over and over again. Due to its complexity, even he took 3 days without eating or drinking. During this process, Xu Renju remained in a state akin to deep meditation, deaf to the outside world. After everything was successfully completed, Xu Renju, dizzy from hunger, pushed open the door and found 2 excited old men in his apartment. To be honest, at this moment, Xu Renju was a bit panicked. Inside the apartment, the 3 of them stared at each other with wide eyes, exchanging glances, the atmosphere momentarily frozen. "Teacher Xu, are you hungry? Would you like me to cook you some noodles?" At that moment, it was Li Mandy who broke the silence, putting on a flattering smile and speaking with a tone that was utterly sincere. No joke, this was a true master. It was foreseeable that on the day the aircraft carrier was launched, Xu Renju would undoubtedly become famous across the world. And most importantly, he was just over 20 years old with a brilliant future ahead. If they didn't seize the chance to be polite now, once Xu Renju went to the Research Institute, they might not even have the right to approach him. At this moment, they had already set aside the age gap between them. Given the importance of the documents filling the room, it could be said without exaggeration that in the future within the alliance, whenever ship propulsion was discussed, no one would be able to bypass the name Xu Renju. To single-handedly perfect a field that had almost no foundation within the alliance. What a terrifying achievement that was. In scientific research, precedence is given to the one who achieves mastery. This young man before them was fully deserving of their respect. Yet the reality was such. Thinking of this, they couldn't help but clench their teeth. That damned Research Institute sure knew how to hide things, even pretending to send them on a search. Damn them. Who would have thought that a dismissed intern would be the core figure behind the alliance's first aircraft carrier? On the other side, seeing the 2 slightly excited old faces, Xu Renju's expression turned somewhat peculiar. It was then that it dawned on him. These seemed to be 2 old professors from the school. But what was going on? That look in their eyes. Why did it seem like they wanted to devour him? Just then Xu Renju's unusual reaction also made the two old professors realize their own loss of composure. The two exchanged a glance, and Li Mandi cleared his throat before explaining everything in detail. When Xu Renju heard that they had been sent by the Research Institute to find him, a look of surprise appeared on his face. Thinking it over, it must be that the data he had left behind was being discussed again. It seemed that the delay in the aircraft carrier's launch was indeed due to propulsion issues. And judging by the severity of the situation, the proposal from a dismissed intern like him would not have been brought up for discussion. With this thought, Xu Renju's gaze shifted to the two old professors who were still looking around, his eyes flickering slightly. Coincidentally, he had been worrying about how to send the data to the Research Institute. At the Naval Engineering Research Institute in the chief engineer's office, the door opened. Xing Hongjuan, who had just finished reporting, walked out and ran straight into Ruan Qinghuan. But Ruan Qinghuan only gave him a cold, expressionless glance before knocking on the office door. Without Engineer Xing, I heard that team leader Ruan has been immersed in studying that document for the past few days, even delegating the technical assessment entirely to her subordinates. At that moment, the assistant walking beside Xing Hongjuan whispered. Hearing this, Xing Hongjuan cast a meaningful glance at Ruan Qinghuan's back, paused for a moment, and then spoke in a flat tone. It's understandable for young people to be motivated, and suffering a bit of hardship isn't a bad thing. With that, he walked away without looking back, clearly still unconvinced by the single turbine proposal. That in turn had been dismissed by his own decision, and he had studied that document before. Even he had to admit that while the document was risky, it wasn't without the possibility of success. But he knew better that what the Alliance needed now was to stay grounded, so even if given another chance, he would not change his choice. Inside the chief engineer's office, Deng Yanxian looked at his prized disciple and smiled, saying, I heard you've been devoting yourself entirely to that document these past few days. Ruan Qinghuan nodded, neither confirming nor denying. Seeing this, Deng Yanxian turned his gaze to a document on the table and said, Do you know Engineer Xing just handed me the current solution for the propulsion system? I took a look and thought it was worth studying. At this, Ruan Qinghuan remained unmoved, her expression indifferent. Seeing her like this, Deng Yanxian's expression shifted, and he asked, What? Still confident in that proposal? As his words fell, a faint, barely perceptible glimmer flashed in Ruan Qinghuan's eyes, and then she nodded and said, Deng Yanxian raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by her response, and continued, And what is your assessment now? Upon hearing this, Ruan Qinghuan pushed up her glasses, a deep light flickering behind the lenses, and spoke slowly, The more I study it, the more I find it inscrutable. As her words fell, a sharp gleam flashed in Deng Yanxian's eyes, and then he narrowed them. He knew his student well, proud, arrogant, with a personality that loved truth above all else. On the bright side, it was a temperament well suited for scientific research, meticulous and rigorous. But on the dark side, it meant questioning everything, simply put, a bit stubborn and rigid. And yet this clever contrarian actually held such high praise for a document that lacked data and formula support. After all, she had only given a just okay evaluation to a paper that Deng Yanxian had always been proud of. So hearing those 4 words from her mouth was undoubtedly harder than climbing to the heavens. But Ruan Qinghuan's evaluation truly startled him. He had expected that after studying it for a while, she would find all sorts of flaws in the proposal. Yet now, not only had she failed to find any loopholes, but she had also given it such high praise. Could it be that up to this point she hadn't discovered any deviations in the proposal? He had also looked at that document, but only cursorily, and even now, upon reflection, he felt there was something unreasonable about it. But now, for a moment, Deng Yanxian's convictions began to waver. Could it be that his previous choice was wrong? With this thought, Deng Yanxian's expression turned serious, and he asked, By the way, Qinghuan, have you found the person? Not yet. The old professors I commissioned earlier haven't sent any news yet. Ruan Qinghuan shook her head, a hint of regret appearing for the first time on her fair jade-like face. After this period of study, her curiosity about that intern had reached its peak. She wanted to see what kind of intern could conceive such a precise plan. Commission again. Never mind, leave this matter be. They'll find the person myself. Mid-sentence, Deng Yanxian's expression shifted, as if something had occurred to him, and he said in a low voice. As he spoke, his gaze once again fell on the document on the table, his eyes complex. That was the solution that Xing Hongjuan had just reported. At the Naval Engineering Research Institute, though the night was already deep, the institute remained brightly lit. Under such arduous circumstances, the entire aircraft carrier RD team was exerting every effort to break through the difficulties as soon as possible. In the office of the chief engineer, Deng Yanxian was also awake. As the chief engineer of the entire aircraft carrier development team, the burden on his shoulders was the heaviest within the team. At this moment, he was wearing his reading glasses, meticulously comparing a set of documents, his pen scribbling. After Ruan Qinghuan's evaluation during the day, Deng Yanxian had developed a keen interest in Xu Renju's single turbine proposal. Whenever he had spare time, he would immerse himself in it. Perhaps he himself did not realize that this single turbine proposal was like a spell constantly arousing his curiosity. What a pity. After a long while, Deng Yanxian's expression showed deep regret. The deeper he delved, the more astonished he became. He had repeatedly analyzed the currently known data. He discovered that the theoretical foundation of this data was flawless. In the scientific research community, this was a terrifying thing. A saying often circulated in the scientific research community: there is no absolute truth. Every plan has flaws and imperfections, yet this data was impeccable, at least from his perspective. This meant that the person who wrote this proposal had an extraordinarily solid theoretical foundation, Thus, upon realizing this, Deng Yanxian's heart was filled with regret. If only this proposal had come 10 years earlier, no, even 5 years earlier, he would have personally devoted himself to the research. Then how could the vast alliance be held back by the power system of just one aircraft carrier? What a pity. It was too late. With only a proposal, no data, no drawings, no processes, everything was too late. The alliance no longer had time to spend on this. At least this proposal could not be used on the alliance's first aircraft carrier. It was ultimately too late. Deng Yanxian let out a long sigh, his expression somewhat dejected. Just as he was lamenting, the blinking email icon in the lower right corner of his computer caught his attention. Deng Yanxian's gaze showed a hint of confusion. He knew that only insiders knew his email address. But in this special period, who would send him an email? Curious, Deng Yanxian opened the email. To his surprise, it was a massive email, over 30 GB. However, the next moment his attention was completely drawn by a few small words at the beginning of the email: aircraft carrier power system, overall plan, full adaptation version. Instinctively, Deng Yanxian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Opening the table of contents, he roughly scanned it, and found that this so-called plan was a complete system covering not only the steam turbine, but also other subsystems connected to it. From the table of contents alone, it seemed to encompass all power-related components of an aircraft carrier. Seeing this, even the usually composed Deng Yanxian found his breathing slightly uneven. Regardless of the authenticity of this email, during this sensitive period, the table of contents alone was enough to captivate him. But as the chief engineer, he forcibly restrained his emotions, opened the email, and began to browse carefully. Of course, one person could not possibly read through over 30 gigabytes of files. But as an engineer of the aircraft carrier power system, and a leading authority in the alliance's relevant field, Deng Yanxian's professional level was evident. He only needed to randomly pick a module that currently had issues and compare it to roughly gauge the professionalism of the email. Turning to the later pages, he began searching for the turbine section. But the next moment, the corner of Deng Yanxian's eye twitched slightly. Single turbine. In the office, Deng Yanxian frowned, staring at the email with an ambiguous expression. Is this a coincidence? Was it done deliberately, or was it planned in advance? For a moment, Deng Yanxian thought of many possibilities. Clearly, he did not fully trust this strange email. It seems I must start from the root. He muttered to himself, then looked at the email. The truth and falsehood would be known from within. Then he began reading word by word, murmuring under his breath. Refined division of turbine pipeline plan to minimize heat loss. Deck steam catapult and turbine transmission plan. At first, Deng Yanxian was skeptical, but as he read on, his expression grew increasingly serious. When he reached the detailed page on the steam turbine, his heart skipped a beat. This is... The next moment, his gaze shifted to the documents on his desk. After careful comparison, Deng Yanxian could no longer control his emotions. He discovered that the single turbine design envisioned in the email was remarkably similar to the one described in the current. More importantly, the email's drawings were not vague descriptions, they were accompanied by pages of data and form. Realizing this, he scrolled through the files. Tens of thousands of pages apart from drawings and text were mostly equations and formulas. This meant the email was a complete plan. Thinking this, Deng Yanxian instinctively looked at the sender's name. Alliance University of Science and Technology. Indeed, Alliance University of Science and Technology. Deng Yanxian let out a long breath, his eyes filled with shock. He recalled that the initial aircraft carrier power system plan had taken dozens of top scholars nearly 3 months. Deng Yanxian was not Zhang Chonglin or Li Mandi. He was the chief engineer of the entire aircraft carrier RD team. He knew well how difficult it was to create a complete power system plan without any reference. He recalled that the initial aircraft carrier power system plan had taken dozens of top scholars nearly 3 months of non-stop work, and it was only a first draft. Counting the final version, the design alone had taken 5 years, not including the subsystems connected to the steam. But now the facts were laid before him, leaving no room for disbelief. Deng Yanxian's expression shifted, and he finally took a deep breath. He knew this matter was no longer something he could judge alone. Thinking this, he summoned his assistant. Notify all module leaders to gather in the conference room within 10 minutes. The summoned assistant looked confused, instinctively checked his watch, and couldn't help asking, now, right now. Deng Yanxian said resolutely, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He had a faint feeling that the institute might have misjudged someone this time. The Marine Engineering Research Institute's usually underused conference hall was now ablaze with light. The heads of various modules filed in one after another, stifling yawns, every attendee a top-tier scholar in their respective fields. Before long, all the leaders were seated, their gazes fixed on Deng Yanxian, who sat at the head of the table, eyes closed in contemplation. For a man at the threshold of 70, the events of the first half of the night had already taken a toll on his spirits. Yet not long after Deng Yanxian slowly opened his eyes, the weariness in them fleeting. He quickly composed himself, glanced around the room, cleared his throat, and began to speak. Colleagues, this meeting is classified. Therefore, before we begin, I ask that everyone turn off all electronic. As his words fell, a brief murmur rippled through the audience. The leaders exchanged glances, surprise evident in their eyes. A classified meeting. After all, the concept of a classified meeting was rarely invoked. Aside from the project's initial phase, the last such meeting had been held during the recent sea trials. Could it be that the aircraft carrier's launch was back on the agenda? Had the propulsion issues been resolved? With these thoughts, the leaders, having switched off their devices, turned their attention to the unperturbed Xing Hongjun at the front. But before they could dwell further, Deng Yanxian at the forefront spoke again. I believe you've all heard of the single turbine proposal recently. Today's main agenda is to discuss that very proposal. As his words landed, Xing Hongjun's expression flickered, but quickly steadied while the room buzzed with astonishment. Hadn't the single turbine model been rejected in the previous meeting? Order. Deng Yanxian called out, unable to ignore the commotion. At the chief engineer's command, silence was swiftly restored. Then Deng Yanxian continued. I am now transmitting a document to the computers at each station. Please examine it carefully. With that, his assistant performed a few operations, and the email from Xu Renju appeared on the electronic screens. In the ensuing moments, the module leaders, driven by curiosity, began browsing through it. Soon voices rose and fell within the hall. A complete proposal. It's a complete proposal, exclaimed one leader, astonishment in his voice. Could it be that the single turbine proposal discussed a few days ago was always this complete? Harnessing steam from the turbine to power the catapult, thus saving deck space. Whose idea was this? There are even blueprints for the steam piping. The head of the aircraft launch module remarked in surprise. Brilliant conception. According to the plan, the single turbine layout could drastically reduce the carrier's startup time. This structure. I see. No wonder. Added another leader, this time from the control module. Deng Yanxian seemed to have anticipated the reactions in the room. That was why he had not limited the meeting to the propulsion module alone. The integrated carrier power system proposal encompassed far more than just the power plant. In fact, the proposal linked every power-related module together. Strangest of all, even the galley's stoves. The benefits were clear. It not only saved valuable space on the carrier. One must remember that an aircraft carrier is not just a massive weapon, it derives its power from the formidable combat capability it projects. A carrier is a maritime base integrating cutting-edge technologies and advanced weaponry, offensively potent and defensively robust. The key lies in its embarked aircraft. Never underestimate these carrier-based planes. They are the trump card that can decide the outcome of a war. Typically, the number of aircraft is fixed from the design stage. But this single turbine plan significantly frees up space, meaning the hangar could accommodate a few more planes. Deng Yanxian couldn't help but marvel. What kind of mind could conceive such ingenious solutions? Moreover, it systematically connected previously isolated modules, which boded well for the future integrated development of the Union. This was why Deng Yanxian had gathered all the RD team leaders. As expected, once the first carrier was launched, the Union would push forward with plans for a second and even a third. When that time came, the core development team would still be the people in this room. Exposing them to this proposal would be beneficial. Amid the chatter, Xing Hongjun's expression grew somber. And not just him. The heads of the various propulsion subsystems also looked uneasy. The unanimous praise for this proposal was in effect a repudiation of their own work. Deng Yanxian noticed this, but for reasons unknown remained silent. After a long pause, when the atmosphere in the room had settled, he spoke again. Colleagues, you've all seen the proposal. Let's move to the next item. Should we adopt this as a backup plan for the propulsions? Let's vote by a show of hands. Those in favor, please raise your hands. As his words fell, the majority began to understand the situation. This was a move toward a second plan, but would the propulsion team accept it? Nevertheless, for most in the room, a second option was indeed advantageous. After a moment's thought, the majority raised their hands. As expected, nearly everyone except the propulsion module leaders raised their hands. The atmosphere in the room grew subtly tense. The propulsion leaders remained silent, as if expressing their dissent through silence. If this proposal of dubious origin were adopted as a backup, what would become of their previous efforts? In response, some module leaders quietly lowered their hands. The propulsion system was one of the most critical subsystems of the carrier, holding significant weight within the development team. If the propulsion team refused, the matter would likely go nowhere. Seeing this, Deng Yanxian's expression remained unchanged. He turned to Xing Hongjuan, the chief of propulsion, and said with a smile, "Engineer Xing, feel free to speak your mind on this." If Xing Hongjun nodded, the plan would be feasible. At this, Xing Hongjun's expression shifted. After a moment of deliberation, he said slowly, "Chief Engineer, I find it inappropriate. The source of this document is unclear and no feasibility study has been conducted. Moreover," he paused mid-sentence, then continued, "and more importantly, at this sensitive time, such a move would undermine the morale of our team." His words fell one by one, and everyone in the room couldn't help but lapse into thought. A brief silence fell over the meeting room. It must be said Xing Hongjun saw things clearly. Setting aside the data itself, merely this decision would inevitably cause subordinates to speculate. All present were heads of various modules, large and small, leaders of teams. They shared a common understanding: once morale wavers, a team becomes difficult to lead. If this decision were made, it would be hard to prevent subordinates from doubting their previous work. In such a critical period, failure to maintain unity would undoubtedly be fatal. With this thought, everyone instinctively turned their gaze toward Xing Hongjun. Truly a seasoned scholar hitting the nail on the head. It seemed this proposal would not pass. But just then an untimely voice rang out. "So for the sake of your pitiful self-esteem, you would abandon another possibility of success, eh?" As the words fell, the entire room fell silent. Everyone looked at the speaker in shock. Unsurprisingly, it was Wan Xinhuan again. She adjusted her glasses, her gaze coldly fixed on the heads of the propulsion system, and pressed on relentlessly. "Or do you believe that your self-righteous pride is more important than the Alliance's first aircraft carrier?" As her words fell, all the propulsion system heads turned pale, yet none dared to speak. If Xing Hongjun's earlier remark had been a sharp insight, a far-sighted consideration for the overall situation, then Wan Xinhuan's words were undoubtedly a stab to the heart, piercing through the thoughts of everyone in the propulsion system and placing them in opposition to the entire project. "You care about the overall situation? Then you'll care about an even larger one." Instinctively, everyone glanced at Wan Xinhuan, seated at the lowest end, and finally dared not underestimate this young team leader. What courage, single-handedly taking on the entire propulsion system. With the sharpness of her words, she left them speechless. Who else in the entire aircraft carrier RD team could match that? As her voice faded, the atmosphere in the meeting room seemed to become even more eerie. For a moment, the situation seemed to split into three factions: the propulsion system choked into silence, the other heads looking on, and finally the solitary Wan Xinhuan. Yet everyone present knew that the propulsion system would not let this humiliation go unanswered. Sure enough, a long sigh broke the silence. Following the sound, they saw Xing Hongjuan, his face showing a hint of weariness, shaking his head as he spoke. "No matter what team leader Wan says, the propulsion system will not back down on this matter." His tone was resolute, yet upon closer listening it carried a note of helplessness. But regardless, the matter was settled. With the chief engineer of the propulsion system having spoken, even Deng Yanxian could hardly force the issue. Hearing this, Wan Xinhuan's eyes flickered. She stared at Xing Hongjun for a long moment, then stood up and said decisively, "In that case, I'm afraid my values are incompatible with yours. I resign." With that, she began gathering her things to leave. At this, the room erupted. Everyone's perception of Wan Xinhuan was elevated once more, and even Xing Hongjun's face showed a flicker of surprise. So fierce, giving up a bright future for a single proposal. For a moment, everyone was curious. What kind of magic did this proposal possess that could drive the Alliance's youngest research scholar to such extremes? Deng Yanxian sat at the head, observing the reactions below. Outwardly calm, he inwardly sighed. Just then a hurried knock came at the meeting room door. It happened that Wan Xinhuan was at the door and instinctively opened it. The next moment, a scholar rushed in frantic. He shouted at Deng Yanxian, "Chief Engineer, it's terrible. The steam turbine's boiler has exploded." As the words fell, the meeting room erupted in uproar. "What a... Impossible." Before Deng Yanxian could respond, some immediately sprang to their feet, and Deng Yanxian's expression also changed, becoming extremely grave. But as the chief engineer, he forced himself to calm down. Looking at the chaotic meeting room, he said in a deep voice, "Silence." At his command, everyone immediately quieted, turning their eyes to him. With a stern expression, Deng Yanxian looked at the crowd and ordered, "The entire institute is now in emergency state." "Yes." With that, Deng Yanxian hurried toward the dock, followed by a group of people. When the group arrived at the dock, the sight before them was despairing. In a short time, raging flames had spread across the deck, the towering fire lighting up the night sky. Thick smoke drifted away with the wind, and with it the hope in everyone's hearts. It was over. Before the dock, the dense crowd stood in dead silence. Many could no longer bear it, and collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down their faces in the firelight. In the silent weeping, the scene was like an eternal image deeply etched into everyone's hearts. The Alliance's decades of accumulated effort were destroyed in an instant. In the center of the crowd, Deng Yanxian was crestfallen, unable to resist rubbing his sore eyes. His originally straight back seemed to have hunched a little. Now the old man's expression finally revealed an indescribable weariness. Decades ago, when the Alliance's first aircraft carrier was put on the agenda, he was already a renowned scholar both in the Alliance and worldwide. Upon learning of this, he resolutely volunteered to lead the Alliance's first aircraft carrier. At the time, many advised him not to take on this thankless task. Given his status in the academic community, he no longer needed such a project to prove himself. Yet he did not hesitate, for he knew where his path lay. Throughout the journey from the project's inception, various difficulties and obstacles had been hindering the team. Design preparation, technical preparation, process preparation, construction preparation. Despite the perilous journey and graying hair, he had still come through because he knew how he must go. If he did not first blaze a trail, the path, named rejuvenation, would never open for the Alliance. But today, for the first time, Deng Yanxian felt lost. Was the path he had led right or wrong? Where was the Alliance's future path? After a moment, Deng Yanxian closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The next instant, he opened them abruptly, the firelight blazing fiercely in his pupils, and the weariness on his face was swept away. In that brief moment, he had figured it out. Where is the road? The road lies underfoot. The fire continued to spread, and against the backdrop of the flames, Deng Yanxian's resolute voice rang out, echoing through the dockyard. Comrades, we have not yet failed. Why should we be so sorrowful? Hearing this, everyone raised their heads, almost in unison, looking toward Deng Yanxian ahead. Have we not suffered enough failures? The darker the night, the brighter the stars. The more failures we face, the closer we are to success. Please adjust your mindset and devote yourselves to the work ahead. Failure is not frightening. What is frightening is not even having the chance to fail. Let us use this blaze to celebrate the near future in advance. With Deng Yanxian's thought-provoking words, the heavy atmosphere at the dock gradually eased. Only after Deng Yanxian gave the order did the crowd disperse, once again throwing themselves into their work with renewed fervor. In the end, only a handful of people remained at the dock. Among them was Xing Hongjun. At this moment, Xing Hongjun had completely lost the sharpness he had shown earlier. His face was haggard, his eyes vacant, staring blankly at the still-burning hull. In just a short span of time, he seemed to have aged 10 years. Clearly, the scene before him had dealt a heavy blow to this middle-aged man. It could be said that everything now could be traced back to the power system. As the chief of the entire power system, Xing Hongjun felt he was undeniably responsible. More importantly, the conviction he had fought for over a decade had scattered with the wind, carried away by this great fire. Everything he had insisted on, everything he had believed in, had collapsed before his eyes. Thinking back, how laughable his words had been. Perhaps, as Yuan Xinghuan had said, what he clung to was merely his self-righteous pride. At that moment, Deng Yanxian walked over. Looking at the deeply dejected Xing Hongjun, a glimmer of recollection flickered in his eyes. He spoke. Hongjun, do you remember how you looked when you first joined the team 15 years ago? Hearing this, Xing Hongjun was startled, lifting his head slightly to look at Deng Yanxian. But Deng Yanxian seemed not to wait for his answer, instead continuing on his own. What kind of person were you back then? Sharp-spirited, never bowing to any difficulty. Deng Yanxian's words fell one by one, and Xing Hongjun's gaze sank into recollection. Over a decade ago, at less than 30 years of age, he had taken the post of chief engineer of the power system, which at that time had almost no foundation. Despite the unknown path ahead, he had gritted his teeth and made it to today. On reflection, he had gained much, but also lost much. He had thought before about what he had lost, but no matter how he pondered, he could not figure it out. He seemed to have forgotten. Under the weight of one achievement after another came complacency, timidity, but today, under Deng Yanxian's enlightening words, he remembered what he had lost. He had lost the very passion. The sharpness of youth had worn away, drifting through the years like a drunken dream. Deng Yanxian continued his vivid narration, but then his tone shifted. But now, sometimes I can't help but wonder, is the Xing Hongjun of today the same person as the Xing Hongjun of yesteryear? In these difficult times, which Xing Hongjun do we need? Do you understand? The words struck Xing Hongjun like a jolt. He trembled, his spirit shook, and a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes as he murmured under his breath, Chief, I understand. Seeing this, Deng Yanxian patted him on the shoulder and said earnestly, think carefully. How does the current predicament compare to the initial one? At this, Xing Hongjun's expression shifted several times before he gritted his teeth and said, please give your orders, Chief. Very good. I will be away for a while. You will temporarily take charge of the institute. Do not disappoint me. Deng Yanxian looked in a certain direction, speaking solemnly. I understand. Xing Hongjun's gaze was firm, and he nodded heavily. With that, Xing Hongjun strode toward the institute, his steps resolute. Shortly after he left, a short roar echoed across the dock, followed by a convoy of roaring military green trucks pulling up in formation. In the distance, the faint sound of rotor blades thumping could be heard. The convoy halted, and many soldiers armed with live ammunition, wearing navy blue combat uniforms, disembarked and lined up in neat rows. This was, after all, a naval port of the Alliance Navy. Such a major incident could not have escaped the military's notice. Soon a figure stepped out from the front of the ranks and walked toward Deng Yanxian's location. The newcomer wore the current white dress uniform of the Alliance Navy. He was middle-aged with a dark, stern face that now showed a certain gravity, exuding an air of authority without anger. He walked with a vigorous stride, the golden stars on his shoulders shimmering in the glow of the flames. Upon reaching Deng Yanxian, the middle-aged man greeted him. "Chief Deng." "General Fan." Deng Yanxian nodded in recognition, clearly acquainted with this person. He spoke. "This is no ordinary person. He is the senior military official sent by the Alliance Command to cooperate with the team in constructing the aircraft carrier." Gazing at the raging flames, the middle-aged soldier's face grew heavier. "Chief Deng, is the situation under control?" Deng Yanxian turned his head, his eyes complex, as he looked at the hull, nearly consumed by fire. After a long silence, he let out a deep sigh. "General Fan, please have the troops seal off this area for now." Hearing this, the middle-aged soldier's heart trembled, and he understood. This meant the situation was not under control. With that thought, the middle-aged soldier's expression turned complicated as he glanced at the dry dock, a bittersweet feeling welling up inside him. "By the way, I need the military's cooperation. I must go to the capital myself." Deng Yanxian added. The middle-aged soldier frowned, puzzled. "Chief Deng, this is a critical moment. The Institute needs you here to take charge. If you have any requirements, the military can fully cooperate." The middle-aged soldier assumed Deng Yanxian was going to the capital to seek help. To his surprise, Deng Yanxian shook his head firmly, his tone resolute. "No, this time I must go personally." The middle-aged soldier asked out of curiosity, "Why?" At this, Deng Yanxian's gaze drifted into the distance. Somehow the once pitch-black sky had begun to show a glimmer of light. "Because there lies our hope." The moment he realized the situation was beyond control, Deng Yanxian knew in his heart. Perhaps the future of the Alliance's aircraft carrier would rest in the hands of a young man. Inside the Naval Engineering Research Institute, Xing Hongjun gazed through the window at the military aircraft receding into the distance, his expression growing increasingly resolute. In that moment, he seemed to transform back into the man he had been 15 years ago, no longer cowering, no longer burdened by endless caution. "Engineer Xing, what should we do next?" His assistant whispered beside him. Just now the assistant felt that his superior had changed, becoming almost like a different person. Yet judging by the situation, it didn't seem to be a bad thing. Hearing this, Xing Hongjun's eyes sharpened. He spoke each word deliberately. "First, release the news. The aircraft carrier's launch is postponed indefinitely. As for the reason..." He paused, gritting his teeth as if making a difficult decision. But in the next instant he made up his mind. "The reason, failure of the propulsion system team." As the words fell, the assistant was startled and quickly said, "Engineer Xing, can this news be released? And isn't the reason a bit forced?" Xing Hongjun narrowed his eyes and replied in a displeased tone, "The chief engineer left me in full charge before his departure. Must I seek your approval for every decision?" The assistant trembled in fear, thinking to himself, Engineer Xing has truly changed. Before, no matter the situation, he was always calm and composed. What's gotten into him today? Despite the doubts swirling in his mind, the assistant dared not ask, and quickly responded, "Yes, I'll arrange it immediately." He then hurried out of the office as if fleeing. It must be said the assistant was quite efficient. Within half an hour of Xing Hongjun's orders, the aircraft carrier development team's social media accounts on major platforms simultaneously announced the indefinite postponement of the Alliance's first aircraft carrier. It was early morning, and people across Shenzhou just waking up were greeted by this explosive news on their phones. Instantly, the topic shot to the top of every platform, creating a sensation. Countless people in Shenzhou discussed it fervently across various platforms. Wasn't it already postponed once? Why again? Last time it was just a delay, oh now it's indefinite. Sigh, how can this be? It was almost ready for launch. I heard it's a problem with the propulsion system. Damn, can't they break through this bottleneck? I knew it was useless. Domestic engines just aren't good enough. They should have used foreign ones earlier. Harsh as it sounds, it's the truth. Here comes the rational centrist again. If we stop researching just because things aren't working, then no technology would ever advance. I say to hell with the truth. Damn traitor. The guy above is right on the mark. Accurate, incisive, direct, fair, objective, complete, three-dimensional, comprehensive, dialectical, metaphysical. Meanwhile, unlike the mixed reactions within the Alliance, foreign platforms were uniformly negative. First a delayed launch, now indefinite postponement. That's so like you Shenzhou people. Just buy our engines, Shenzhou people. Be nice, and maybe we'll give you a discount. An aircraft carrier tests a nation's overall industrial capability. Clearly Shenzhou people aren't qualified yet. In all of Azhou, only our Dahanming Empire is worthy. Go to hell, you lousy Koreans. Tisk, Shenzhou people's manners still need improvement. I'm your father, you damn Korean. Remember that I'm your father. Such flame wars were everywhere, with most countries holding little optimism for the Shenzhou Free Alliance's first aircraft carrier. Even the Shenzhou people themselves struggled to muster confidence. After repeated delays and the indefinite postponement announcement, their faith had nearly eroded. Meanwhile, in a meticulously arranged conference room in the Western world, an ancient round table was precisely filled with 12 people. Each had the standard features of Europeans: blonde hair, blue eyes, high-bridged noses. The old man at the head had completely white hair and rare heterochromatic eyes. "How do you all view the postponement of the Xinzhou Free Alliance's aircraft carrier?" the elderly man asked, opening his eyes slowly. Immediately someone replied, eagerly, "It's within expectations. Our nation's aircraft carrier took 30 years from initial development, then another century of refinement to achieve today's mature navy. How many years has the Xinzhou Free Alliance spent? 10, 20. If they think they can surpass us in a few decades, then all gentlemen present might as well go see God." The room burst into laughter. Even the old man at the head shook his head, chuckling inwardly. A technological gap of nearly a century is not something that can be breached overnight. "What are your thoughts on our strategy toward the Xinzhou Free Alliance moving forward?" The old man spoke again, his one blue and one green eye appearing eerie. Someone immediately answered calmly, "Tighten the technology blockade. Do not give them the slightest opportunity. Even if we can't stop their aircraft carrier program, we must delay their progress as much as possible." Most present nodded in agreement. After a moment, the old man seemed to recall something and asked, "By the way, what is their aircraft carrier development team?" Someone promptly replied, "Rumor has it their internal affairs are chaotic. According to intelligence, their chief engineer is not even with the team. If I recall correctly, the chief engineer is named Deng Yanxian." The old man's eyes flickered, feigning casual. Yes, Deng Yanxian should not be underestimated. Their intelligence was evidently thorough, and someone immediately replied. Another added, "Of course, he was a close friend of that gentleman. It's fortunate that the Xinzhou Free Alliance tied itself in knots, or else with that gentleman the alliance wouldn't be stuck on just a small aircraft carrier." Silence fell over the room. The speaker regretted his words and instinctively glanced at the old man at the head. That gentleman was the old man's Achilles heel. As expected, the old man's expression darkened. The atmosphere grew tense, but eventually the old man rose and silently left the room. The remaining people exchanged glances, inwardly relieved. In the Xinzhou Free Alliance, the Science and Technology Development Committee in Jingdu is the department that oversees all scientific research affairs. Its status in the hearts of the Xinzhou people is undoubtedly high. Inside the Science and Technology Development Committee building, for some reason, it was unusually quiet compared to other days. Even though it was still early morning, the staff bustling through the corridors were hurried and taciturn. In the chairman's office of the Science and Technology Development Committee, the incumbent chairman Mo Xiaoming and vice chairman Li Zhihan sat before the tea table with solemn expressions discussing something. So the cause of the accident was a leak of high-pressure steam due to poor sealing of the steam turbine connection pipes, leading to an explosion, Mo Xiaoming said, holding a page of data, frowning as he read. Just moments ago, the fire on the aircraft carrier had been brought under control. Even if it was ultimately reduced to a mere shell, the carrier development team had launched a detailed investigation into the steam turbine explosion. The material in Mo Xiaoming's hand was the investigation report just transmitted by the carrier development team. Indeed, fortunately, there were no casualties this time. That's a blessing in the midst of misfortune. Li Zhihan nodded beside him, speaking with a look of relief. If the carrier development team had been completely wiped out in the explosion, the Alliance's decades of effort would have truly been wasted. Steam turbine. This steam turbine again. In response, Mo Xiaoming showed no relief, but instead spoke with a pained expression. How many more setbacks must the Alliance suffer here? As far as he knew, the carrier had previously failed multiple pre-launch attempts and had been shelved. According to internal personnel, there were defects in the initial design. Upon hearing this, Li Zhihan, after a long silence, Mo Xiaoming let out a long sigh. In the end, it's a thorn in our side. If it remains unresolved, the Alliance will forever be constrained by others. There was no choice. Over the past 30 years, the rapid development of the Xinzhou Free Alliance had aroused the vigilance of certain major powers in the world. In the eyes of certain hegemonic nations, the whole world was a big cake. Every additional person sharing the cake meant an extra competitor invisibly. Thus, in the past 30 years, the Xinzhou Free Alliance had felt certain constraints in various fields, more or less. And these constraints, needless to say, were artificially created by certain countries. At this moment, Li Zhihan continued. By the way, Chairman, regarding public opinion on the internet, many citizens are questioning whether the Alliance has the capability to build the aircraft carrier. Li Zihan's mention of questioning was still a euphemism. In fact, many citizens had petitioned for the cessation of research on the aircraft carrier. Upon hearing this, Mo Xiaoming nodded unmoved and simply asked, "How is the entire carrier development team doing now?" "I heard they're okay. Their morale is stable." "But," as he spoke, Li Zihan's expression became complicated. "But what?" Mo Xiaoming frowned. "But I heard that Chief Engineer Deng flew to Jingdu overnight, and according to the military, he said his target is the Alliance University of Science and Technology." Mo Xiaoming's frown deepened, and he said in a low voice, Alliance University of Science and Technology. Yes, according to Chief Engineer Deng, the future of the Alliance's aircraft carrier lies right there, Li Zhihan said word by word. Hearing this, Mo Ziyuming's eyes showed a flicker of surprise, but he quickly calmed down, lowering his head in thought. After a long pause, Li Zhihan continued to ask, Chairman, regarding the current public opinion and Chief Engineer Deng's side, how should we handle it? Chief Engineer Deng. I understand. Li Zhihan nodded, said his piece, and left the office. Only Mo Xiaoming remained walking to the window and gazing in the direction of the Alliance University of Science and I understand. Li Zhihan nodded, said his piece, and left the office. Only Mo Xiaoming remained walking to the window and gazing in the direction of the Alliance University of Science and Technology, speaking in a voice that no one else could hear. The hope of the Alliance's aircraft carrier. Meanwhile, at the Alliance University of Science and Technology, the administration building. As the first university founded since the establishment of the Alliance, the administration building had a history of nearly a century. The spacious building, after several expansions and renovations, now exuded an air of antiquity. In the president's office, He Lushing held a thermos cup in one hand and a document in the other, reading. As the president of the Alliance University of Science and Technology, He Lushing had been leading this institution for nearly a decade. Under his guidance, the university had begun to show signs of becoming the top university in the Alliance. Apart from his role as president, he was also one of the most senior figures in the Alliance's scientific research circles, with students scattered all over the world. Knock, knock, knock. Suddenly the sound of knocking. Come in. As He Lushing's words fell, the office door opened, and a middle-aged man rushed in hurriedly. President, something terrible has happened. Upon hearing this, He Lushing instinctively frowned. Clearly the man's behavior displeased him. Although he had stepped back from the academic front line for a long time, the composure cultivated over the years remained unchanged. In his view, whether as a scholar or an educator, the most basic quality was to remain calm in the face of crisis. Thus, He Lushing maintained a calm expression and lectured with an air of unruffled poise. Hongba, I don't mean to criticize you, but after all, you are the president's assistant. On a small scale, you represent my dignity. On a larger scale, you represent the dignity of our school. What a way to behave with all this fuss. Hearing this, Zheng Hongba's expression changed, but he forced his tone to be somewhat calmer. President, the teacher Su you asked me to find hasn't been located yet. Additionally, Professor Zhang Chonglin and Professor Li Mandi have also mysteriously disappeared for several days. Is that so? Upon hearing this, He Lushing's calm face showed a trace of disturbance. Yes, President, what should we do? Zheng Hongba asked with a hint of anxiety. All right, I understand. You don't need to worry about this matter, I'll handle it. You may go. He Lushing waved his hand at Zheng Hongba and said directly. Oh. Seeing this, Zheng Hongba could only obediently walk out, closing the office door behind him. After Zheng Hongba left, He Lushing thought for a moment and finally picked up the phone on his desk and dialed a number. After all, he had been entrusted with the task. Whether he found them or not, he had to give an account. As for why he hadn't found them, He Lushing didn't dwell on it. The school was large, or perhaps they were holed up in some lab. After a few rings, He Lushing smiled and spoke into the phone. Hey, is that old Deng? In the office of the president of Lianming Keiji Dashue in Jingdu, as soon as the call connected, He Lushing noticed the noise on the other end, accompanied by the whoosh of cutting air. But he didn't think much of it at first, exchanging pleasantries with Deng Yanxian on the other end. Over there, Deng Yanxian immediately recognized the voice of his old friend, returned the pleasantries, and then tentatively asked, By the way, old he, did you find the person I asked you to look for? After speaking, Deng Yanxian felt a flicker of anticipation, but He Lushing's next words made his heart sink. Sorry, I haven't found that teacher Su you asked for. It's been days and my people haven't even seen a trace. According to the students, teacher Su hasn't been teaching either. He Lushing felt a bit embarrassed, sighed, then recalled something and mentioned offhandedly. Strange, 2 of our senior professors have also gone missing. What's going on? Hearing this, Deng Yanxian's heart skipped a beat, a sense of unease creeping in. He had heard that Wan Qinghuan had also entrusted 2 senior professors before. If it was a coincidence, it was far too coincidental. Suddenly, as if struck by a grim thought, Deng Yanxian's expression changed. He cut the call short, exchanging a few more pleasantries before hanging up with a heavy tone. After hanging up, Deng Yanxian's face grew somber. The noisy rotor blades outside only added to his agitation. Despite his turbulent mind, he forced himself to calm down. He turned to Wan Qinghuan, who was sitting nearby, and asked, Qinghuan, any news on the 2 senior professors you entrusted? Seeing her teacher's initiative, Wan Qinghuan shook her head. No, the 2 senior professors have gone silent. Teacher, what's wrong? But Deng Yanxian didn't answer, his brows furrowed even tighter. Several groups, unreachable for days, and emails sent in the dead of night. Was this really a coincidence? Having led the aircraft carrier RD team for years, he was well aware of the tactics of certain malicious elements. With this thought, Deng Yanxian's unease deepened, his expression turning stern. Earlier, when the carrier caught fire, he stayed calm because he knew the alliance still had a fallback. But now, Without knowing if the Alliance's last resort was cut off, his heart was in turmoil. Teacher, teacher. Wan Qinghuan's voice snapped him out of his daze. The email was sent in the middle of the night only a few hours ago. There's still a chance. Write the military. Deng Yanxian's mind raced, muttering under his breath. Sensing the gravity, Wan Qinghuan wisely didn't interrupt his thoughts. Coming to his senses, Deng Yanxian leaned forward and addressed the pilot sternly. I want to speak with General. The trip had 2 aircraft. Deng Yanxian in the lead, the middle-aged military officer behind. Yes, sir. The pilot didn't hesitate, picking up the radio and reporting. After a burst of static, a familiar voice came through the radio. This is Fan Wujian. Deng Yanxian quickly grabbed the handset, speaking solemnly word by word. General Fan, this is an emergency. I request the military to mobilize forces and seal off the entire linkage Dashua. On the other end, Fan Wujian was silent for a moment, clearly hesitant. Mobilizing the military to blockade a prestigious university. It would offend the entire educational and half the scientific research community. The consequences were too severe. Even he couldn't bear the responsibility. To be honest, Fan Wujian was also puzzled. At this critical juncture, what could be more important than coordinating the team? So he hesitated. Seeing Fan Wujian's delay, Deng Yanxian gritted his teeth and laid out his deductions. I suspect external forces are interfering with the Alliance's aircraft carrier development. At those words, Fan Wujian on the other end froze, then his expression shifted, his rugged dark face instantly exuding a killing intent. If that were the case, the military had to step in. With the Alliance's first aircraft carrier at stake, sealing off the entire Jingdu would be no problem. The carrier project was the top priority of the Alliance, and within the military, it was of paramount importance. So in the next moment, Fan Wujian replied firmly, understood, Chief Designer Deng. He then hung up, his eyes sharp as he dialed another number. This matter was of great importance. He would have to report to higher authorities and mobilize all available military resources. Back in the aircraft, the radio returned to static, but Deng Yanxian's mood didn't lighten. He gazed through the window at the distant clouds, wishing he could fly to linkage Dashua instantly. Wan Qinghuan had also come to her senses. From the conversation between Deng Yanxian and Fan Wujian, she realized the situation might be dire. A hint of worry crept into her heart. She was very curious about that dismissed intern. In the president's office at linkage Dashua, Lushing felt something was off after hanging up. Reflecting on the conversation with Deng Yanxian, a vague unease stirred within him. After a moment's hesitation, he picked up the phone and dialed a well-known number. After a few rings of voice answered, Lushing's expression tensed, and he spoke deliberately into the phone. Hello, is this the police? I want to report a case. Meanwhile, shortly after Fan Wujian reported, the military responded swiftly. In a secret military base near Jingdu, after a piercing alert, convoys of military trucks carrying fully armed soldiers streamed out of the base one after another. On each truck, officers were briefing their subordinates with stern expressions. At the rear of the convoy, several main battle tanks and armored vehicles followed in an orderly fashion. Soon the roar of fighter jets and the whir of helicopter blades filled the sky above the base. But whether ground or air, all forces headed in one direction. The Alliance military was getting serious. In Jingdu, Shenzhou, Zhou Lianming, the sun was mild and the breeze gentle. For the locals, it was a crisp autumn weekend, perfect for outings. The most scenic spot in Jingdu was undoubtedly the university town in Xinsu district. Unlike the monotonous skyscrapers in the city center, this university town, composed of dozens of Alliance universities, was vast with minimal buildings. Here one could experience a completely different kind of prosperity. Moreover, the human element was a major factor. Here, countless vibrant young men and women unabashedly displayed their youthful exuberance. So on holidays, many office workers would flock here, perhaps to cure their accumulated mental exhaustion, or perhaps only through this could they find a trace of their former selves. With the big news breaking that morning, the university town was even livelier than usual. On the lawns, many people were lounging, basking in the sun. But this peaceful scene didn't last long, interrupted by a series of urgent mechanical roars. Many people gaped in shock at the sight before them. On the broad road, several police cars led the way, followed by a dragon-like convoy of military vehicles. From their vantage point, they couldn't see the end of the convoy. What was happening? Many were bewildered, staring at the seemingly endless line of vehicles. But even more shocking was yet to come. Someone noticed that the ground rumble had shifted to the sky. Then they felt a blur in their vision. The sky seemed to darken. The clear sky was now covered by a swarm of mechanical beings. A full squadron of armed helicopters flew past their eyes. Moreover, in the deeper clouds, roars like dragon calls echoed back and forth, making many people's eyes twitch. Fighters. They had even deployed fighters, and in considerable numbers. Normally, fighters only appeared in large numbers during military parades. For city patrols, at most 2 fighters would be deployed. But now, judging by the roar, at least an entire air wing had been scrambled. Who was this important? This question kept recurring in people's minds. Instinctively, some bold ones started following the convoy. Fortunately, the military seemed to have a clear objective and showed no interest in the bystanders, so they didn't. Thus, more and more people began to trail the convoy. After all, the Chinese tradition of spectating was no joke. Linkage Dashue was located slightly west of the center of the university town. As the Alliance's oldest university, the current university town had essentially expanded from Linkage Dashue. Thanks to the foresight of several past presidents, the university had reserved plenty of expansion land before the university town was established. So even today, the campus of Linkage Dashue was still quite spacious with many lawns and greenery. In one corner of the campus, there was even a large artificial lake, a testament to the century-old institution's heritage. After all, this was Jingdu, where every inch of land was precious. Soon the military convoy arrived, shattering the tranquility of this century-old university. Many students watched in disbelief as the military took action. First, columns of fully armed soldiers quickly disembarked and lined up in orderly fashion. Then the earlier armed helicopters circled overhead looking for landing spots. The preserved lawns of Linkage Dashue came in handy. Finally, the commanders of the ground and air forces jogged toward the main gate. Deng Yanxian, Wan Qinghuan, and Fan Wujian had arrived at Linkage Dashue 10 minutes earlier and were waiting at the gate for the main force. Deng Yanxian's mind was in turmoil, and he didn't pay much attention to the grand scene. But Wan Qinghuan, being young, observed the spectacle with interest. Soon the two commanders reported to Fan Wujian one after another. Sir, all entrances and exits of the school have been sealed off. Please give orders. Sir, the Kunping Special Operations Unit has assembled. Please give orders. Fan Wujian nodded solemnly, first addressing the first commander. From now on, set the combat readiness level to the highest. The school is a battlefield. Contain everyone on campus. I want no one entering or leaving. Hearing this, Deng Yanxian wanted to say that containment might be inappropriate since most on campus were friendly, but thinking of the carrier's importance to the military, he held his tongue. Yes, sir. We will complete the mission. Then Fan Wujian turned to the commander in Special Forces gear, face painted with camouflage. Quickly occupy all high ground within the school in a 1-kilometer radius. If you find any suspicious individuals, apprehend them without needing to report. After issuing the orders, the two commanders saluted simultaneously and jogged back to their respective units to relay instructions. The ground forces split into two groups. The smaller group headed to the various entrances of Linkage Dashue to reinforce security. The larger group dispersed, flooding into the teaching buildings and administrative offices. Meanwhile, the elite special operations teams paired up and moved toward the nearby high ground. After giving all the orders, Fan Wujian said to Deng Yanxian, "Chief Designer, you may enter now." Deng Yanxian nodded and gestured to Wan Qinghuan. Then the group proceeded into Linkage Dashue. Meanwhile, in the president's office, He Lushing was leisurely reading the latest issue of Nature, holding a thermos. Just then a frantic knock interrupted his thoughts. Before he could respond, the door burst open and Zheng Hongba rushed in, stammering. President, terrible. The school. There are so many police and... Before he could finish, He Lushing cut him off, looking displeased. How many times have I told you? As educators, we must remain calm. Look at you. But President. Zheng Hongba, thinking of the scene outside, couldn't stay calm and tried to continue. He Lushing interrupted him again. Take your time, don't rush. And he began another lecture on composure. In the principal's office of Linkage Dashue, did you understand? Keep calm in everything. Never be impatient. Do you understand? He Lushing tirelessly instructed, while Zheng Hongba beside him could only nod repeatedly. Principal, I understand. Hearing the expected reply, He Lushing finally smiled. After taking a leisurely sip of water, he said, You are teachable. By the way, what were you going to say? There are police outside, right? I called them just now. As the words fell, Zheng Hongba's eyes widened abruptly, as if in disbelief. He looked He Lushing up and down, as if seeing him anew. Were all the dense troops and police outside called by the principal? Could the principal of Linkage Dashue wield such immense influence? Zheng Hongba scrutinized He Lushing's expression, trying to find some clue, but the confidence on the principal's face did not seem feigned. At that thought, Zheng Hongba's heart calmed down, and he let out a long sigh of relief. Since everything was under the principal's control, it was fine. Anything else? If not, go cooperate with the police comrades and help provide clues to find someone. He Lushing said as he looked at Zheng Hongba, who had finally relaxed. Unexpectedly, upon hearing this, Zheng Hongba's heart tightened again, sensing something amiss. Find someone. Thinking of those soldiers as sturdy as oxen, Zheng Hongba felt a strange unease. Such a grand spectacle just for finding someone. Did they need so many people for that? Shouldn't it be for arresting someone? Just as he was about to ask, a commotion arose again outside the office door. Then the office door was opened, and a group of people who looked like teachers hurried in. As soon as they entered, they all spoke at once, chattering. One teacher said, Principal, it's bad. The campus is full of military personnel, and our students are all under control. Not only students, but also many teachers, someone added. Yes, yes, principal, what happened? Those young people outside have no martial ethics, a teacher with a slight accent asked. Upon hearing this, he Lishing blinked, also stunned. However, he caught a key word, military personnel. So next he turned his gaze to Zheng Hongba and said, didn't you say police? What's with the military? Zheng Hongba shuddered upon hearing this. No way weren't those people outside called by the principal. If not called by the principal, then those people outside. At this thought, cold sweat instantly broke out on him. After a long while he said word by word. No, I said police and military. Bastard. Bastard. Why didn't you make it clear? Unexpectedly, before he could finish, he was interrupted by He Lishing's furious voice. Hearing this, Zheng Hongba felt aggrieved. He himself had wanted to make it clear. Now others had their swords at the throat of linkage Dashua, and they were still babbling. How shameful. How shameful. Just as He Lishing was fuming, a large group of heavily armed soldiers burst in and quickly surrounded them, their expressions very stern. Seeing this, He Lishing pushed through the crowd and raised his hand to shout, misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. I am the principal of linkage Dashua. Take me to see your commander. At this moment, He Lishing finally regained some of the composure befitting a principal. After his words fell, the commander of this military squad eased his expression, slightly stepped forward, looked He Lishing over, and then said, Sorry, Mr. Principal, I have a mission to carry out. Please bear with me. Follow me. With that, he led He Lishing outside. Before long, He Lishing, under the guard of 2 soldiers, was brought before Deng Yanxian and his group. Old Deng Yanxian greeted with a smile. Old Deng, what's going on? Did you call these people? Why didn't you give me a heads up? He Lishing seemed surprised to see Deng Yanxian. Ahem, confidentiality. Deng Yanxian also felt a bit embarrassed as this matter was somewhat improper. Forget it. I want to ask what's going on, but at least release the teachers. Sorry. Confidentiality. Deng Yanxian showed a look of difficulty and shook his head. Improper as it was, caution was still necessary. Seeing this, He Lishing was a bit displeased and said stubbornly, Then remove the people behind me. He Lishing said this while instinctively glancing at the 2 soldiers guarding him from behind. Sorry. Confident. Deng Yanxian still gave the same answer. Hearing this, He Lishing became angry. What did this mean? Was the principal of the top university in the alliance not trustworthy? At this thought, even with his good self-restraint, he couldn't hold back and said in a harsh tone, Old Deng, what do you mean by this? Ahem. Deng Yanxian was about to explain when a squad of soldiers escorted 2 uniformed personnel. The squad commander came to Fan Wujian and reported loudly, Found 2 suspicious armed personnel. As the words fell before Fan Wujian could speak, the 2 police officers began to protest their innocence. Misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding. We only came here after receiving a report. Unexpectedly, Fan Wujian narrowed his eyes, looking at them with distrust. Is it such a coincidence? The report was made exactly 10 minutes before the lockdown. It's true. If that damned person hadn't filed a false report about finding someone, how would we dare come to the lockdown zone? A police officer hurriedly replied, his tone very sincere. As the words fell, He Lishing's face changed instantly behind him, and he couldn't help but cough twice, looking away with an awkward gaze. Zheng Hongba beside He Lishing seemed to realize something. His gaze darted between the 2 police officers, and He Lishing, his expression peculiar. So the report was made here. On this side, Fan Wujian shook his head, waved his hand, and said directly, No one is to be released until the investigation is clear. Yes, the squad commander replied loudly, and then escorted the 2 away. Afterwards, the group walked unhurriedly toward the interior of the school. At this moment, the campus of linkage Dashua was entirely filled with military personnel. Gazing at the lush campus, Deng Yanxian's heart calmed down a little. The success or failure of the Alliance aircraft carrier might rest on this operation. Outside the Lianming University of Science and Technology, the military had secured all exits and entrances of the campus. Each entrance was temporarily transformed into a pass that one man could hold against 10,000 assailants. Not to mention anything else, the several heavy machine guns set up in the temporary trenches under the control of the gunners, their black, oily muzzles stared straight ahead like icy venomous snakes, ready to strike at any moment. This scene alone was enough to send chills down one's spine. Furthermore, on high vantage points invisible to most, many special forces squads had set up heavy sniper rifles, sharply scanning all suspicious figures within their field of view. Additionally, the entire exterior of the campus was cordoned off with caution tape, and rows of fully armed soldiers patrolled with sharp eyes. It could be said that the Lianming University of Science and Technology had been forged into an impenetrable fortress, so much so that even a mosquito that had been training for 2.5 years would find it difficult to fly in. However, outside the cordon, a large crowd had gathered, and the soldiers did not drive them away, allowing them to watch the spectacle. Speaking of which, the people of Xinzhou were bold. Even under such circumstances, they could not change their nature of being curious bystanders. Amidst the noisy crowd, they discussed in a mix of voices. What do you think with such a huge spectacle? What is it all? Someone couldn't help but ask. Perhaps judging by the military scale this time it's enough to fight a small-scale war. You're overestimating a small-scale war. The warplanes in the sky alone are enough to destroy a small country, someone exclaimed. Could it be that they want to wipe out the entire Liaoming University of Science and Technology? Someone whispered. Did something happen at Liaoming University of Science and Technology? As these words fell, it immediately drew a group of people's slightly expectant gazes. Could it be that there was someone here who knew the inside story? Feeling the pairs of gleaming eyes, the speaker finally panicked and hurriedly lowered his head. I was just talking nonsense. Seeing this, the crowd withdrew their disappointed gazes, their curiosity growing rather than diminishing. What kind of important figure or major event could mobilize such a massive military force? But now they could only stand by and watch. Inside the Liaoming University of Science and Technology, all the teaching buildings and administrative buildings were now completely filled with a sea of military green. Everywhere visible on campus, soldiers with loaded weapons were patrolling. Moreover, the intersections inside the school were set up as checkpoints that only allowed entry but not exit. This time the military had mobilized almost all available personnel. The consequence was that in a short time the Liaoming University of Science and Technology had become a formidable fortress. In addition, a group of people walked unhurriedly toward the depths of the campus. Whether out of courtesy or something else, Deng Yanxian finally agreed to let He Lushing accompany their group. After all, this was his territory. As the president of the Liaoming University of Science and Technology, the basic right to know was necessary. Nevertheless, two soldiers still closely followed behind him. Although the reason had changed from escort to guard, He Lushing always felt a chill creeping up his back from time to time. Looking at the campus that was vastly different from usual, He Lushing wanted to ask, is it really necessary? Just then some commotion came from ahead of the group. This immediately made all the surrounding soldiers tense up. For them, although they didn't know the specific mission, judging from the highest combat readiness level, the importance of this mission was self-evident. Even the slightest rustle of grass and trees was enough to keep their nerves taut, and the hands gripping their rifles were. Fortunately, upon closer look, it was just a group of controlled faculty and students who, upon seeing He Lushing, immediately shouted, President! President! What happened? Why are there so many military personnel? Yes, President, what should we do now? The cacophony of voices came, making He Lushing feel annoyed and also like crying. He also wanted to know. Just as he was at a loss for how to respond, Deng Yanxian stepped forward, raised his hand to signal everyone to calm down. Seeing someone in charge appear, the faculty and students' emotions stabilized somewhat. Deng Yanxian smiled and said to the crowd, Dear students and teachers, this is a joint anti-terrorism drill between the military and your school. To ensure the realism of the drill, we did not notify in advance. Please do not panic. Everything will return to normal after the drill. This was the speech he had prepared in advance. Regardless of the mission's success, he would have to explain to the outside world. Unexpectedly, after his words, the faculty and students looked at Deng Yanxian, then at He Lushing with strange expressions. But still they felt as if the gun muzzles were about to point at the president's forehead. And they had just experienced it firsthand. Those military men looked like they would shoot at the slightest disagreement. But now there was no choice. Whether it was a drill or not, they had to treat it as one. Bypassing the crowd, the group continued walking deeper into the school. Just then a squad commander ran over, saluted to Fan Wujian, and reported loudly. Report, sir, the target has been located. As instructed, we have not taken any action. Hearing this, Deng Yanxian hurriedly stepped forward and asked with some surprise. Found him. But then Deng Yanxian's expression changed, and he asked nervously, How is the situation? Is the target okay? Upon hearing this, the squad commander showed some difficulty. This. It's hard to say. As his words fell, everyone's expression changed. Deng Yanxian frowned and asked urgently, What do you mean hard to say? Forget it, just lead the way. Halfway through the question, Deng Yanxian stopped asking and said directly. Seeing this, the squad commander subconsciously glanced at Fan Wujian and after receiving a nod, quickly led the way. With brisk steps, the group headed in a direction. At this moment, He Lushing behind them finally came to his senses, looking at the unfamiliar campus with a complex expression. So all this huge commotion was just to find someone. What kind of person deserved such a search? That teacher Xu. No way. After thinking it over, He Lushing couldn't figure it out and had to obediently follow behind. The truth would be known soon. Meanwhile, Yuan Qinghuan's face showed a hint of excitement. The mysterious intern, she was about to meet him. Driven by urgency, the group soon arrived at the foot of a dormitory building. Looking at this unremarkable small building, Deng Yanxian felt inexplicably nervous. Although based on the current situation, it was very likely that he had made a mistake. But somehow Deng Yanxian still couldn't control his emotions. Yuan Qinghuan beside him was also nervous. As for He Lushing behind, he was more curious. As per Deng Yanxian's request, the area around the small building was silent, undisturbed. Soon after composing themselves, they walked slowly toward the stairwell. Soon with a ding, the elevator door slid open slowly. Led by the squad commander, they arrived at a door that was slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, Deng Yanxian raised his hand and slowly pushed the door open. The apartment, with one bedroom and two living rooms, was filled with white except for simple furniture. For a moment, the feeling of the two old professors from before descended upon them. Books, all books, or rather all documents. In addition, a few people in the corner of the living room with their backs to them caught their attention. Those people seemed not to have noticed them, yet still bowing their heads and doing their own things. The room was so quiet that apart from the rustling sound of pen and paper, no other sound could be heard. Realizing that the person they were looking for was right ahead, Deng Yanxian felt so nervous that he could hear his own heartbeat. Just as they slowly approached, the people in front finally spoke. Professor Lee, this formula loop is not calculated this way. This is the derivation of traditional heat engine efficiency. To calculate, you must use. This voice was relatively young. Yes, I'm used to it. Sorry, Teacher Xu, I'll recalculate right away. This voice was somewhat old, but the tone carried a hint of respect. Then the slightly younger voice spoke again. And this, Professor Zhang, to figure out the optimal angle for laying steam pipes, you must combine it with the ship's design space, saving as much as possible within the limited space. As his words fell, another old voice answered. Yes, I remember. Watching this scene, the people behind had slightly strange expressions. No way it was too strange that anyone would find it hard to hold back. Two elderly men, like elementary school students, sat around a young man asking him questions. This scene was definitely incongruous. At this moment, Deng Yanxian couldn't help but cough twice. Instantly, the two people in the back turned their heads simultaneously, two equally haggard faces staring straight at him. Deng Yanxian was startled. Looking at the two gaunt mummy-like faces, it was hard to imagine how long these two old professors had gone with. For a moment, the atmosphere was silent. Then Xu Renju came to his senses and spoke, his tone puzzled. You all. Hearing this, Deng Yanxian withdrew his gaze from the two old professors' faces and looked at Xu Renju, sizing him up with a bright gleam in his eyes. So this was the intern, indeed impressive. Also sizing him up were Wan Xinghuan and He Lushing. Even though she had mentally prepared herself, Wan Xinghuan couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder as she looked at this young man not much older than herself. Truly, there is always a higher mountain. As for He Lushing, he also had some recollection of Xu Renju. Could it be that such a huge commotion was really just for this Teacher Xu? Thinking this, He Lushing's eyes twitched violently. If that were really the case, he felt that as the president of Lianming University of Science and Technology, he had been somewhat negligent. But soon Deng Yanxian's words answered his question. Are you Teacher Xu Renju? Don't be nervous. We are from the Naval Engineering Research Institute. We have seen your previous email, and this time we came to invite you, Teacher Xu, to be a special consultant at our institute. Deng Yanxian said with a warm smile. As soon as he finished, Fan Wujin beside him was stunned and quickly waved his hand and said, Wait. I want to confirm, Chief Engineer, our target has always been this Teacher Xu. It was no wonder Fan Wujin couldn't accept it. Anyone would find it hard to believe. Mobilizing almost the entire military force of the capital just to find this young Teacher Xu. It was not that he judged by appearances, but it was truly beyond common sense. If those two old professors were the targets, he would have felt better. Hearing this, Deng Yanxian did not answer him, but continued speaking to Xu Renju. Teacher Xu, don't rush. You can take your time to consider. As his words fell, Xu Renju was also a bit stunned. Okay. By this time, Xu Renju had also come to his senses. It seemed that his email had been adopted. In that case, it wasn't a bad thing. Regardless, he had finally fulfilled a wish in his heart. Thinking of this, Xu Renju couldn't help but recall a familiar face in his mind and sighed inwardly. In that case, he would go. Thinking this, Xu Renju was about to speak. All right, I can. But before he could finish, he was interrupted by another voice. Teacher Xu, please wait. Let me discuss this with the... Turning to the sound, it was He Lushing. At this moment, He Lushing had fully come to his senses. Although he didn't know what Xu Renju had done, he could see it. So this was a poaching attempt. And not an ordinary one. With such a display, even a fool could see Xu Renju. The most infuriating thing was that as the president of Lianming University of Science and Technology, they were poaching from his own school, without even letting him know. He then pulled Deng Yanxian aside, and said through gritted teeth, Well, old Deng, you've really handled this beautifully. Oh, what do you mean? Deng Yanxian looked innocent and shrugged. He Lushing hadn't expected that the chief engineer of the aircraft carrier development team would resort to being so unscrupulous. Seeing this, He Lushing decided to drop the pretense and show his cards. You? I don't care. Xu Renju is now a professor of our Lianming University of Science and Technology. Without my say, no one can take him away. Hearing He Lushing's blatant lies, Deng Yanxian grew anxious. Nonsense. When did he become a professor of Lianming University of Science and Technology? If Xu Renju were only a teacher at Lianming University of Science and Technology, then with his authority, he could be temporarily transferred to the aircraft carrier development team. On the other hand, if he were a professor, he would need He Lushing's approval. But judging by his attitude, he didn't look like he would. Inside the faculty apartment. Nonsense. When did he ever become a professor at the Alliance University of Science and Technology? Listening to Deng Yanxian's doubt, He Lushing cast him a faint glance and spoke nonchalantly. Sorry, just now he was. You know I have the authority to grant an exceptional professorship. You, Deng Yanxian was immediately enraged, and at that moment, he also realized what was happening. This old rogue would not easily relent without some benefit. At this moment he regretted for the first time making such a big scene. If he had quietly taken Xu Renju away, the old scoundrel might never have noticed. But regret aside, given the circumstances, he would still have made the same choice. With this thought, Deng Yanxian glanced at the smug He Lushing, calmed himself, and then spoke in a flat tone. Tell me, what do you want? In his heart, he was prepared to be fleeced. Sure enough, He Lushing revealed a sly fox-like grin and held up 3 fingers. First, I demand that the Aircraft Carrier Research and Development Team recruit a certain number of students from the Alliance University of Science and Technology each year. Upon hearing this, Deng Yanxian frowned, but still nodded. This request was not excessive, given the quality of the university's students. They were indeed qualified to join the Carrier Development Team, as evidenced by the one present. Satisfied, He Lushing nodded and continued, Second, Professor Xu is only seconded to the Carrier Development Team. After the carrier is launched, he must return to the Alliance University of Science and Technology. Jokingly, though, He Lushing did not understand what Xu Renju had done. The fact that Deng Yanxian was going to such lengths made its importance obvious. If such a talent were poached by Deng Yanxian after the project, it would be a loss. Deng Yanxian thought for a moment and finally nodded. Naturally, however, in his mind, he was thinking that once the project was done, things might not be up to He Lushing, a man capable of single-handedly developing a complete set of plans. How astonishing. Clearly, he also had no intention of letting go of such a talent, confident that he could offer better terms than He Lushing. Finally, He Lushing raised a 3rd finger and continued. All right, the last condition, I want the name of the Alliance University of Science and Technology to appear on the list of the Alliance's first aircraft carrier development team. But before he could finish, Deng Yanxian refused sternly. Impossible. Don't even think about it. Compared to the first 2, this request seemed modest. But upon closer thought, it was a matter of critical importance. Adding the university's name would imply that the carrier development was also a credit to the university. Such an undeserved merit was too easy to claim. He Lushing feigned regret. Then there's no other way. They'll take my leave. Why, I need to prepare Professor Zu's title certificate. With that, he made to leave. Wait. Deng Yanxian stopped him. Looking at He Lushing, he gritted his teeth. This old fox had him figured out. But he had no choice. He had to agree to this condition. Without Xu Renju's help, even with that complete email, he wasn't sure if the carrier could be built successfully. Compared to that, this request was trivial. Fine, I agree. Then, Teacher Xu. Professor Xu. By the end, Deng Yanxian was almost grinding his teeth. This old man was a master of profiteering. He Lushing smiled. The 2 reached an agreement and returned to the crowd. By then, Wan Xinghuan had already hit it off with Xu Renju and was chatting enthusiastically with a few senior professors. So, Teacher Xu, have you considered? Deng Yanxian asked directly. Xu Renju looked at the 2 senior professors, then at He Lushing, and finally nodded. No problem. I can go. Deng Yanxian beamed. Great. Get ready. Well, set off immediately. With that, Deng Yanxian gave Fan Wujian a meaningful glance. Upon hearing that Xu Renju was leaving, the 2 senior professors both showed reluctance. Over the past few days, they had been completely captivated by this young man, young enough to be their grandson. The more they interacted with him, the more they sensed his unfathomable depth. At times, they even wondered if they could crack open his skull to see how many ingenious ideas were stored inside. In fact, what they had learned from Xu Renju in these few days surpassed what they had acquired in the past decade. Now that the 2 bigwigs had spoken, they had no say. But finally, Li Mandi seemed to remember something and asked Xu Renju, Teacher Xu, what about the material? As he spoke, Li Mandi pointed to the room full of documents. Xu Renju's eyes showed a hint of difficulty, but he quickly made a decision. If you 2 professors don't mind, they're yours. Deng Yanxian magnanimously raised no objection. In his eyes, these were probably substandard plans, so he didn't care. Little did he know that this decision would later fill him with regret. The 2 professors were stunned, not expecting Xu Renju to simply give them away. They had thought he would at least ask them to keep them safe, but he seemed indifferent to these materials. These were materials that could revolutionize the entire Alliance's shipbuilding industry. The entire field would be shaken by them. Realizing this, the 2 professors breathed heavily, their eyes burning with desire as they gazed at the room full of documents. These were more precious than gold to them. Instantly, they felt enveloped by a wave of immense happiness. Deng Yanxian, noticing their unusual excitement, was curious but didn't dwell on it. Of course, he couldn't be blamed aside from those in the know who would imagine that every casually placed document in this room would shake the Alliance if released. I have nothing to prepare. If it's possible, we can leave now. Xu Renju looked around and then spoke. Thinking of that familiar yet unfamiliar research institute, he felt a sense of melancholy. Who would have thought that after many months he would be going back? Jingdu Alliance University of Science and Technology Faculty Apartment Building 10. It was nearing noon, and the sunlight had grown rather intense. For Xu Renju, who had not been outside for a long time, it felt somewhat unfamiliar for a moment. After a brief period of adjustment, Xu Renju looked at the campus before him, his gaze involuntarily freezing, then he subconsciously rubbed his eyes. Is this still the Alliance University of Science and Technology? Has it changed so much after such a... This doesn't look like a university at all. If you said it was a military base, people would probably believe it. Seeing Xu Renju's slightly astonished expression, Deng Yanxian smiled and explained somewhat awkwardly. Ahem, teacher Xu, don't mind it, just a small scene. After all, in hindsight, everything before him was a big misunderstanding caused by him. Unexpectedly, Lushing, who was behind and heard his words, immediately darkened his face, with several black lines appearing on his forehead. This is still a small scene. Today he had seen more military troops than during the National Day Parade. If it were any bigger, wouldn't you tear down the Alliance University of Science and Technology for me? Oh. Understood. Upon hearing this, Xu Renju also gave a polite, yet slightly awkward smile. After speaking, the group walked toward the previous helipad. Since Xu Renju had been found, all military control over the faculty and students of the Alliance University of Science and Technology had been lifted. In fact, the military had already begun to withdraw. Except for the strict control at various intersections, the number of soldiers patrolling the campus had decreased significantly compared to before. Thus, along the road, many faculty and students were already strolling. Apart from perhaps some initial tension, their faces now showed a degree of excitement. Although they were all brilliant talents who had been admitted to the Alliance University of Science and Technology, this scene before them was still something they had never witnessed. Witnessing the elite forces of the Alliance at such close range was a bragging right for them. After all, even the annual military parade of the Alliance might not have a spectacle as grand as this. Along the way, most faculty and students couldn't help but stop and stare when they saw Deng Yanxian's group. Soon someone in the crowd recognized Xu Renju and began whispering among themselves. Isn't that Teacher Xu? What's going on? Hiss. Could it be that all this fuss is for Teacher Xu? Are you crazy? Do you think that's possible? If that's really the case, elite shit. Bold, remember what you said today. It's not impossible. With such a big scene, could it be a leak? Thinking that way is not impossible. Makes sense. Listening to the various whispers around him, Xu Renju remained unmoved. In fact, he was not the kind of person who cared much about others' opinions. If he really did, he would have given up on himself when he returned from the institute, as they said. Meanwhile, Deng Yanxian, observing his calm expression, silently raised his evaluation of Xu Renju another notch. For a young man to achieve such a level of mental composure was rare. Apart from the influence of that email, from what he had seen so far, the qualities displayed by this young man truly made him look at him with new eyes. Soon, under military escort, the group successfully boarded the aircraft. Before departure, Deng Yanxian spoke to Fan Wujian with a hint of apology. General Fan, as it turns out, this matter was likely a misunderstanding. I wish to apologize here. Chief Engineer, you're too kind. The military's role is to cooperate with the Chief Engineer to the best of our ability, but... Fan Wujian shook his head and said firmly, but as he spoke his tone paused, and he unconsciously glanced at Xu Renju on the plane. To be honest, he still found it hard to believe that the future of the Alliance's first aircraft carrier lay in this unremarkable young man. Seeing this, Deng Yanxian reacted and spoke with a hint of amusement. General Fan, the saying heroes emerge from youth applies equally in academic circles. Upon hearing this, Fan Wujian's expression stiffened, his gaze unconsciously shifting to Xu Renju. After a long moment, he spoke with a touch of respect. I am enlightened. Deng Yanxian's words undoubtedly gave him a sense of reassurance. Soon after, his aircraft took off one after another, the military forces on campus began to withdraw in an orderly manner. Looking at the campus that had returned to its usual tranquility, everyone felt a sense of unreality. Inside the helicopter, gazing at the tiny dot-like buildings below, Xu Renju felt a surge of emotion. After a conversation with Deng Yanxian, he learned the latter's true identity. Even he had not expected that the elderly man before him was the chief engineer of the aircraft carrier development team. But instead of feeling fortunate, his expression turned somber. In his view, if the chief engineer had to come personally, it meant the carrier team was facing an unprecedented crisis. It seemed the situation was far more serious than he had imagined. Just as his thoughts wandered, Deng Yanxian spoke up, his tone very casual. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision by Deng Yanxian. To be honest, he had always felt that this student of his had a proud nature and could be impulsive when agitated. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision by Deng Yanxian. To be honest, he had always felt that this student of his had a proud nature and could be impulsive when agitated. Even he had to avoid her when she was being stubborn. Previously, he had been troubled by the lack of someone who could keep her in check, but the steady Xu Renju now gave him such an idea. If there was anyone in the alliance who could keep her in check, it would probably be Xu Renju alone. After all, today Wan Qinghuan had been very docile in front of Xu Renju. Hearing this, Wan Qinghuan instinctively glanced at Xu Renju, but coincidentally, he was also smiling at her. For some reason she averted her gaze and nodded, saying, "No problem, teacher. I have no problem either, Chief Engineer." Xu Renju also replied. In fact, he had some impression of Wan Qinghuan. During his previous stay at the institute, he had heard of the renowned technical group leader. At that time, he was just an ordinary intern, and they had no chance to communicate. But from the exchange, just now this group leader Wan was indeed highly skilled, and this arrangement would be worry-free. After that, no one spoke for a long time. As the scenery outside the window began to descend, Xu Renju realized that the institute had arrived. At the Naval Engineering Research Institute, as the helicopter slowly descended, Xu Renju caught sight of the aircraft carrier's hull, still billowing black smoke, and his eyelids twitched sharply. This was completely different from the situation when he had left. It seemed the severity of the matter was far greater than he had imagined. At that moment, Wan Qinghuan, who witnessed the scene, softly explained to him, "Last night the aircraft carrier's steam boiler exploded, and this is what it ended up as." Her voice trailed off, and even she paused, realizing that this had only happened last night. Upon hearing this, Xu Renju raised an eyebrow, then his gaze turned contemplative. After a long moment, he spoke. "Is it because the airtightness of the connecting pipes was not tight enough that caused the explosion and fire?" As his words fell, Deng Yanxian and Wan Qinghuan stared at him in stunned silence, their eyes filled with surprise. The accident assessment report transmitted last night pointed to exactly this cause, but generally the cause of an accident can only be known through on-site investigation. They believed that Xu Renju could not have known the accident cause in advance. So didn't this mean that with just one glance Xu Renju had figured out the accident cause? Such precise judgment. Could any human truly possess it? "How did you know?" After a long silence, Deng Yanxian asked in a somewhat unnatural tone. Xu Renju hesitated for a moment before speaking cautiously. The reactions of Deng Yanxian and Wan Qinghuan just now almost made him think he had said something wrong. Earlier when I was interning at the institute, I had a chance to glance at the blueprints roughly. At that time, I felt the piping layout in that phase was somewhat overly lengthy and could easily cause high-pressure steam leakage. I even brought up this issue back then." His voice trailed off, and the two breathed a sigh of relief. Good. So it wasn't because he made a judgment after just one look. That's right, how could there be such a prodigy in this world? But then Deng Yanxian and Wan Qinghuan suddenly realized something, and their hearts skipped a beat. Being able to predict just from looking at the blueprints, that seemed even more monstrous. In the next instant, the two looked at Xu Renju, as if he were a monster. Thinking of this, Deng Yanxian suddenly felt a pang of regret. If only someone had taken this issue seriously back then, perhaps none of today's events would have happened. Alas. They exchanged a glance, clearly thinking the same thing. Then Deng Yanxian's gaze at Xu Renju turned fervent. With such a genius, how could the aircraft carrier project fail? Alas. They exchanged a glance, clearly thinking the same thing. Then Deng Yanxian's gaze at Xu Renju turned fervent. With such a genius, as soon as he got off the helicopter, Deng Yanxian said to Wan Qinghuan, "Qinghuan, first get teacher Xu settled. I have some matters to handle." After giving the instructions, Deng Yanxian didn't even care that he hadn't rested all night and hurried away. As the chief engineer of the aircraft carrier development team, many matters required his attention during this critical period. "Teacher Xu, please follow me." Seeing her teacher leave, Wan Qinghuan turned to Xu Renju and said, hearing this, Xu Renju smiled. "Team leader Wan, no need to be so formal. We'll be colleagues from now on. Just call me Xu Renju, that would be more comfortable." Seeing this, Wan Qinghuan nodded and went along. "In that case, please don't call me team leader Wan either. Just call me by my name." After a round of polite exchanges, they became somewhat acquainted. Then, led by Wan Qinghuan, they headed toward the apartment building behind the institute. Meanwhile, back in his office, Deng Yanxian immediately gathered all the heads of the research and development team. In the same meeting room, everyone gathered. Sitting at the head, Deng Yanxian cleared his throat, glanced around the room, and then spoke in a calm tone. "Everyone, this is a critical period, so I'll skip the pleasantries. The construction of the aircraft carrier's hull can be put on the agenda. For the propulsion system, we will use the backup plan this time. All irrelevant modules besides the propulsion system will remain as before." As his words fell, no one objected, evidently having anticipated this. Even the heads of the propulsion system, who had been opposing it all along, now lowered their heads in silence. After the incident last night, they had lost their say. Still, one person raised a hand and spoke. "Chief Engineer, the backup plan is mature, but it hasn't been thoroughly researched. Wouldn't it be too rash to proceed directly with construction?" As he finished, most people present showed thoughtful expressions. Although it was a critical time, the suggestion was not unreasonable. Seeing this, Deng Yanxian, as if having expected it, smiled and said, "I believe everyone is curious about where I went last night. I won't hide it from you. I have already invited the author of that previous email back to the institute." Upon hearing this, the room immediately erupted in chatter, with many people whispering among themselves. "If that's the case, it's not unfeasible. I wonder what kind of scholar could have written that email. It should be a well-known scholar in the field of naval architecture within the Alliance. Could it be that old professor from Tsinghua University? That's right, only that old professor and his team would have such capability. Although they knew that a previous intern had proposed a single turbine plan, they did not connect it with the subsequent email. Or rather, some had made the connection, but dared not speculate in that direction. The gap in level was simply too great. Who would associate such a comprehensive plan with a dismissed intern, even if the two ideas shared similarities? In their eyes, this plan must have been completed by a grandmaster-level senior scholar in the field of naval architecture leading his own team. Listening to the discussion, Xing Hongjuan, seated at Deng Yanxian's lower right, glanced at Deng Yanxian with a flickering gaze. He saw Deng Yanxian wearing a complacent smile, clearing his throat before speaking. All right, you'll find out in due time. The most important thing now is to issue the orders. Dismissed. With that, Deng Yanxian stood up and left first. The various heads of departments also left one after another, their expressions much more relaxed than when they arrived. They could tell that Deng Yanxian was in a very good mood today, evidently confident in that senior scholar. Consequently, they also felt much more at ease. If it was just a matter of building the aircraft carrier according to the plan, the current situation didn't seem too bad. Until the very end, Xing Hongjun remained unmoved, watching the backs of the others, his eyes flickering as if lost in thought. At the Naval Engineering Research Institute, after the previous meeting, the entire aircraft carrier research and development team seemed to be revitalized. Each module worked in an orderly manner on their own tasks. During this period, Xu Renju gradually adapted to the environment. Since the early construction phase had not yet reached the power systems manufacturing cycle, and Xu Renju was not part of the power system team, he enjoyed a relatively leisurely time. Ruan Qinghuan arranged a private office for him within the technical group. Apart from Ruan Qinghuan occasionally seeking him out for discussions, few people came here. Even Deng Yanxian rarely visited due to the project's overwhelming demands. The staff within the technical group showed little curiosity about their new colleague, so days passed in peaceful. In Xu Renju's office, within a short time of his occupancy, the room had transformed into a replica of his former apartment, filled with blueprints and documents. Xu Renju was bent over his desk, engrossed in drawing something. Just then the door handle turned, and Ruan Qinghuan entered carrying a stack of documents. Over time, the two had grown familiar, both being young and easygoing. Ruan Qinghuan had formed a preliminary understanding of Xu Renju. For instance, Xu Renju disliked being interrupted during his research. Interruptions would leave him distracted and irritable, sometimes even provoking anger. Thus, Ruan Qinghuan never knocked when visiting him. Seeing Xu Renju so focused, she chose not to disturb him. Instead, she found a chair and sat down, flipping through her documents. Thus, the two shared an oddly harmonious coexistence in the office. Initially, Ruan Qinghuan found this arrangement peculiar, but over time she grew fond of it. Whether it was an illusion or not, she noticed that when she worked alongside Xu Renju in the same room, her thinking speed and work efficiency seemed to improve. Just then, Xu Renju, apparently finishing his research, looked up and saw Ruan Qinghuan sitting upright, meticulously reviewing documents. A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. Ruan Qinghuan, when did you get here? Hearing this, she looked up and smiled casually. I've been here for a while, you just didn't notice. Oh. Xu Renju nodded dazedly, then began tidying the blueprints on his desk. Ruan Qinghuan approached him, her gaze instinctively drawn to the drawings. On the vast blueprint was a warship of unusual design. No, calling it a warship seemed inadequate given the peculiar shape of its hull. Even the well-traveled Ruan Qinghuan was bewildered. It looked more like a spacecraft from a sci-fi film than. Seeing her expression, Xu Renju chuckled. This was merely a rough concept. Yet intrigued by her curiosity, he couldn't help but remark. What if the Alliance's fleet could operate both on sea and in the air? What? She seemed not to have heard clearly, glancing at him reflexively. Xu Renju shook his head and changed the subject. Nothing. By the way, is there another issue? Hearing his words, Ruan Qinghuan sensed something odd, but couldn't pinpoint it. Recalling her purpose, she went along. It's about the steam catapult. Theoretically, transmitting high-pressure steam from the lower steam turbines to the flight deck. Wouldn't excessively long pipelines increase leakage risks? Xu Renju pondered for a moment, recalling his original design. No, the maximum distance from the lower deck to the flight deck is. Subsequently, the two discussed the issue. Or rather, Xu Renju explained while Ruan Qinghuan listened like a. Whenever Xu Renju reached a key point, Ruan Qinghuan jotted it down in her notebook. If outsiders witnessed this side of her, it would surely cause a stir. Who could imagine the proud team leader Ruan acting so deferential? In any case, after the explanation, her estimation of Xu Renju rose further. In truth, her psychological journey during this time mirrored the dynamics of their recent interactions. Just then, Ruan Qinghuan's phone vibrated in her pocket. She answered it. Hello. It was Deng Yanxian's voice. Qinghuan, there's a problem with the hull construction. I've called an emergency meeting. Please bring Xu Renju along. Hearing the gravity in his tone, she sensed trouble. Okay, teacher will be right there. She hung up and turned to Xu Renju, who was packing his blueprints. Xu Renju, emergency meeting. The teacher insists you attend. Get ready and come with me. Xu Renju nodded. All right, I don't need to prepare anything. Let's go now. Good. Wan Xinghuan replied. Xu Renju followed closely. In the conference room, the assembled department heads wore grim expressions. The heavy atmosphere indicated that the problem was far from trivial. Indeed, during the reconstruction of the aircraft carrier, a structural engineer had made a startling discovery. If the backup power system design were adopted, the hull's internal structure would require significant modifications. The original hull could not accommodate the alternative power system. Thus, despite the urgent timeline, they had to pause and resolve this issue. Without a solution, the power system would be incompatible with the hull. Hence, today's meeting was convened. Soon as more department heads arrived, the tension in the room intensified. But then everyone noticed Wan Xinghuan entering with a young man. This meeting was strictly for module leaders. Previously, the only young face was Wan Xinghuan herself. Curiosity rippled through the crowd, easing the oppressive atmosphere. What was happening now? The silence stretched. Then someone murmured, "Is this?" In the top-floor meeting room of the Naval Engineering Research Institute, Xu Renju remained unmoved by the dozens of curious gazes directed at him. With a calm expression, he followed Wan Xinghuan to the rear of the conference room. At that moment, Deng Yanxian smiled and nodded to the crowd, then turned his gaze towards Xu Renju and, "By the way, I forgot to mention, let me introduce you. This is Professor Xu Renju, a specially invited consultant I have brought in." After speaking, Deng Yanxian seemed to recall something and continued, and Professor Xu is also the designer of the new propulsion system scheme. Well, one of them. In the end, he still refrained from stating outright that the single turbine scheme was designed solely by Xu Renju. After all, it was too extraordinary to believe. Yet even so, as Deng Yanxian's words fell, the meeting room inevitably erupted into murmurs. Even Xing Hongjuan, a key system chief engineer, could not help but cast a few extra glances at Xu Renju. This young man, whose face still bore a hint of youthful immaturity, was actually one of the participants in the single turbine scheme. And a professor, let alone those present. Each had spent over a decade or even decades in the academic circle to earn the title of professor or senior engineer. Now they were told that this young man, hardly older than their juniors, was a professor. Even the acclaimed Wan Xinghuan group leader had not yet reached such a position. But now, was there no justice in this world? No law? With these thoughts, the crowd once again turned their gazes to Xu Renju at the back. He remained expressionless, sitting quietly in his seat. Of course, except for one module leader from the propulsion department. If Xu Renju had noticed, he would have recognized him as the leader of the module where he had interned. At that moment, the module leader's expression showed a hint of contemplation. He felt Xu Renju looked familiar, but could not recall where he had seen him. Although every leader present had heard vaguely about an intern who had been dismissed from the institute, few had actually seen Xu Renju, so it was natural that they did not recognize him. After all, these were all module leaders. Why would they pay attention to a mere intern? Thus, most of them felt not only surprise, but also envy towards Xu Renju. No doubt they thought this must be the prized disciple of the old scholar who developed the single turbine scheme. Otherwise, the chief engineer would not have specially created a consultant position. At this point, seeing the distracted audience, Deng Yanxian cleared his throat and continued, "Ahem, all right, back to the topic. Engineer Li, please outline the current issues." Xing Hongjun then turned to a middle-aged scholar seated to his lower right, the chief engineer of hull structure. The engineer picked up the documents beside him and spoke deliberately. "The problem we face is that if the hull structure is built according to the original design, the structural pattern of the propulsion system will no longer be compatible with the old hull structure. Currently, there are only two solutions: either modify the original hull structure or modify the structural pattern of the propulsion system." Engineer Li spoke eloquently, clearly well prepared before the meeting. Unfortunately, after his words, few in the room echoed his sentiment. Engineer Li, either option is not easy to change. A module leader voiced the common thought. Most attendees nodded in agreement. These two modules were critical components of the aircraft carrier, so any change would affect the whole system. Modifications would likely consume considerable time. Moreover, and most importantly, the structural pattern of the propulsion system, without the involvement of its designer, would be even more difficult to alter. Obviously, most people had overlooked Xu Renju, who was still present. Though surprised earlier, they still did not believe that this young man possessed the competence matching his title. They assumed that Chief Engineer Deng had merely granted him a special consultant title, something akin to a mascot. The meeting room fell into silence. At that moment, no one paid attention to Xu Renju sitting at the back. They did not even consider asking him for his opinion. Sensing the oppressive atmosphere, Wan Xinghuan leaned towards Xu Renju and whispered, "See, these so-called alliance experts go mute at critical moments. It's truly disheartening to work." Wan Xinghuan, as always, dared to think and speak her mind. Xu Renju was momentarily taken aback, then could not help but chuckle softly. The metaphor was indeed apt. Unexpectedly, that soft laugh sounded exceptionally jarring in the silent meeting room. Everyone turned their gazes toward him, and their impression of Xu Renju sank even lower. Sure enough, he was just a mascot relying on his teacher's influence. Many secretly scorned him, and someone could not help but speak his tone icy. I wonder if Consultant Xu has any thoughts. Please feel free to speak without reservation. As he spoke, all eyes fell upon Xu Renju. Seeing this, Xu Renju had no choice but to respond. I do have a few ideas, but since I am new here, I would rather not overstep my bounds. The leader who had questioned him snorted coldly, but did not press further. The others wore amused smiles. This mascot might be lacking in academic expertise, but his rhetoric was polished to perfection. Faced with such obvious antagonism, Xu Renju remained unperturbed, but Wan Qinghuan could not tolerate her fiery temper. She was about to rise and defend him when Xu Renju pulled her back, shaking his head to signal her to stay calm. This gesture surprised those nearby. Group leader Wan, actually being persuaded by someone. How? At this point, Deng Yanxian could no longer stand by. He knew the truth while the others were ignorant. If he did not intervene now, it would be unfair. All right. Consultant Xu is attending his first meeting, so it's natural that he's not fully at ease. Let's continue the discussion. He waited for the conversation to resume. Yet as soon as he finished, the room fell silent again. Deng Yanxian felt quite helpless. The scholars of the alliance seemed increasingly conservative. Finally, Engineer Li stepped forward once more. Chief Engineer, I believe we should make minor adjustments to the hull structure. Though it will take considerable time, it is the only option. Deng Yanxian could only nod helplessly. Very well, let it be. Since the aircraft carrier's launch has already been postponed indefinitely, meeting adjourned. In the meeting room, watching the directors filing out one after another, Deng Yanxian's gaze was complex. He couldn't shake the feeling that the alliance's scientific research circle had grown increasingly conservative over the past 2 decades. Reflecting carefully, it seemed that ever since that old friend became disheartened, the alliance's scientific research circle had never been the same. If his old friend were still in the circle, the alliance's first aircraft carrier probably wouldn't have encountered such twists and turns. Thinking of this, Deng Yanxian felt an indescribable emotion. Then, snapping back to reality, he looked at Wan Qinghuan and Xu Renju approaching him, a hint of apology appearing on his face. Teacher Xu, I'm sorry my subordinates were too abrupt. After saying this, Deng Yanxian let out a long sigh. To be honest, he was also somewhat disappointed in his own team. I'm fine, Chief Engineer, no need to feel sorry. Hearing this, Xu Renju shook his head, his expression relaxed. If he couldn't withstand such verbal blows, he wouldn't be himself. Then teacher, we'll be going. Wan Qinghuan also spoke up, and after saying that, she led Xu Renju away. As soon as they returned to the office, Wan Qinghuan said to Xu Renju, her tone apologetic. I'm sorry, Teacher Xu, it was all my fault just now. If it weren't for me. Unexpectedly, before she could finish, she was interrupted by Xu Renju, who wore a strange expression. Stop. I say, in your hearts, am I that fragile? Xu Renju spread his hands, his tone tinged with amusement. No, I'm sore. Hearing this, Wan Qinghuan's face showed some panic. Seeing this, Xu Renju, hold on. If you're really sorry, could you help me get the current hull structure drawings for me to take a look? Hull structure drawings. Wan Qinghuan frowned, puzzled. You know I don't like jokes. Xu Renju nodded and said calmly. Hearing this, Wan Qinghuan seemed to think of something. Could it be that Xu Renju's remark about having an idea at the meeting was actually true? With this thought, Wan Qinghuan's eyes lit up, and she quickly said, No problem. They'll go right now. With that, she rushed off in a flurry and soon returned with a complete set of hull structure drawings for Xu Renju. From then on, over the next few days, Xu Renju entered a state of seclusion. He had not been shooting in the dark at the meeting. As the designer of the single turbine scheme, he naturally knew his own design inside out. Making modifications to certain parts naturally came more effortlessly to him than to the Institute's personnel. Coupled with the zero machine system in his mind, it was a piece of cake. Although he had not previously studied, professional knowledge in hull structure, the core of solving the problem could be entirely placed on the power system. So the difficulty was not too high. During the days Xu Renju was in seclusion, Wan Qinghuan also grew curious and wanted to check on him a few times, but each time she found the door locked from inside, she had to return disappointed. Over time, Wan Qinghuan's curiosity grew even stronger. Could Xu Renju really solve this problem? After all, the structural system staff had been racking their brains over it for days. But curiosity aside, she still did not dare to disturb Xu Renju. Until one day, when Xu Renju handed her a thick stack of documents, she was still in a daze. She glanced at Xu Renju, and then unconsciously felt the weight of the documents in her hands. A sudden sense of unreality washed over Wan Qinghuan. These are just some small ideas of mine. Help me hand them over to the chief engineer. If that's not enough, I have more in my office, all done on the side. A slightly tired Xu Renju yawned as he said this to Wan Qinghuan. Without waiting for her reply, he turned and walked toward his apartment. Wan Qinghuan was left dumbfounded, staring in amazement at the documents that quickly thickened into a book in her hands, doubting her own existence. Is this really A small idea. Also, what was the last thing Xu Renju said just now? After a while in the chief engineer's office with a bang, Deng Yanxian suddenly stood up, his eyes shining, holding the documents in one hand and slamming the other heavily on the table. Good, good, good. Deng Yanxian said, 3 good, in a row, clearly more than just excited. He had just read through the entire document. This modification plan was undoubtedly the most suitable for the current aircraft carrier development team, not only saving manpower and resources, but most importantly saving time. Even though he already held Xu Renju in high esteem, he had never expected Xu Renju to possess such professional expertise in the field of hull structure. The phrasing Xu Renju used in the plan alone was enough to show that. Yuan Qinghuan stood silently by the side, her gaze complex, clearly still not having recovered from the previous scene. Teacher Xu said he did it on the side, and if it's not enough, he has several spare sets. Hearing this, Deng Yanxian's eyelid twitched involuntarily. On the side. This hand must be too smooth. If this was on the side, then if he were serious, wouldn't it be even better? And there were several spare plans. Calculating the date of the last meeting, how long had it been? Less than a week. Staring at the heavy documents in his hands and hearing that Xu Renju had several more sets, Deng Yanxian felt his throat go dry. Even if he were copying, could he produce so much in such a short time? What a sheer prodigy. It would take a tentacle monster plus a typewriter to be this fast, right? Don't this person's brain and hands ever get tired? With myriad thoughts racing through his mind, Deng Yanxian's gaze grew complicated. Having lived for decades, he doubted his own understanding for the first time. Thinking, Deng Yanxian unconsciously exchanged a glance with Yuan Qinghuan, and both could see the astonishment in each other's eyes. Clearly the teacher and student shared the same state of mind. This person was a sheer scientific research monster. Thinking of this, for some reason Deng Yanxian felt an inexplicable sense of relief. Recalling the deal he had made with He Lushing, this transaction was the most worthwhile one he had ever made in his life. At the same time, Deng Yanxian grew even more determined not to let Xu Renju go. With this thought, he said to Yuan Qinghuan with a serious expression, Qinghuan, organize a meeting with the heads of the structural system. I want to personally hand over this plan to them. As his words fell, Yuan Qinghuan nodded solemnly. Understood. With that, she walked briskly out the door. She knew that the problem that had been troubling the structural system and turning their hair gray would soon be resolved.